Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Hogwarts. Voldemort, don't stop me from studying. Chapter 1. Wade Grey lay in front of the window and saw a grey owl perched on the fence outside the window. It stared at him seriously with its brown eyes, then suddenly lowered its head, spread its wings, and made a cooing sound. Wade had a strange look on his face. If he had seen it right, the owl seemed to have thrown a letter into his mailbox. But this is the one Potter series of novels, which haven't been published yet, right? It has been 11 years since he was reborn in this world. He grew from a babbling baby to 11 years old. He always thought that he was just reborn in the UK of the original world, and he had planned his life development for this. He never thought that he would actually receive a letter from an owl. Isn't this a materialistic world? But since people can be reborn, if magic exists, it seems quite reasonable. Right, or it could just be a bad joke. With a little uncertainty in his heart, Wade pushed the door open and walked out. He subconsciously looked at the owl, and the owl's eyes followed him and turned its head slightly. I don't know if it was a psychological effect, but Wade felt that its eyes were full of spirituality. He held his breath, opened the mailbox, and took out the mysterious letter. When he saw the envelope clearly, his pupils shrank suddenly, and his heart was lifted. On the envelope, the detailed address and Mr. Wade Grey were clearly written. The weight of the parchment was particularly heavy, and the emerald green ink was not a common color. Turning over the envelope, there was a dark red wax seal and a shield emblem on the back. The capital H was surrounded by 4 animals: a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. There was no stamp. Yes, an owl is a messenger. Of course no stamp is needed. Wade took a deep breath and opened the envelope with slightly trembling fingers. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. Wade could not wait to skip the long list of titles and read directly to the following. Dear Mr. Grey, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to study at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Sincerely, Vice Headmaster Female Minerva McGonagall. Wade read the letter over and over again, still unable to believe it. This is actually the world of Harry Potter. He unconsciously whispered, is this true? Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The owl stared at him with wise eyes, waited for a while, then lowered his head to comb his feathers, tucked up one foot, turned his head 180 degrees, and looked at the scenery behind him. Wade was stunned for a moment, then turned around and quickly returned to the house, rushed into his father's study, found the best envelope, embossed in gold-dusted letter paper, and wrote solemnly with a feather pen with a classical aesthetic and fragrant ink. Dear Ms. Minerva McGonagall, I am very honored to receive your letter. If this is not a prank, then I am happy to go to your school to study, but I am not sure how to buy the learning tools in the letter. I look forward to your guidance. With the most sincere greetings, I wish you all the best. Wade Grey. The ink seeped into the letter paper and dried quickly. Wade folded it up and stuffed it into the envelope, and wrote the words Vice Principal Minerva McGonagall received on the cover. After going out, he saw that the owl was still standing patiently on the fence waiting. Wade came closer and held up the letter. This is my reply, please give it to Vice Principal Minerva McGonagall. The owl stretched out a claw to grab the letter, then tilted its head and looked at him expectantly. What else? Oh, please wait. Wade's mind flashed. He went back to the house and grabbed a handful of nuts. However, after handing it to the owl, it just looked down, then swept it away with its wings in disgust, and flew away. Wade, don't eat it. Fortunately, it didn't drop the letter. Back in the house, Wade sat at the table, unfolded the admission letter and read it again and again, his heart pounding. Only then did he feel a little bit of the reality of being admitted to Hogwarts. But in the 11 years since he was reborn into this world, he has never found that he has any extraordinary abilities. He didn't fly to the tree for no reason, nor did he bend the spoon with his mind or make the pen fly out of thin air. Is there really magic energy in my body? Or is it because adults' thoughts are too rational and objective, which invisibly suppresses the innate power in their bodies? Wade clenched his fist, then opened it again, but still did not feel the feeling of invisible magic flowing in the body. He stared at a teacup in front of him, concentrating on imagining. Clang! The teacup suddenly shook in the air without any force, then fell down, rolled on the table, and then slowly stopped shaking. Magic is actually real. Wade stared at his palm and was stunned. After his mood gradually calmed down, he dialed a phone number that he knew by heart. "Mom, do you believe that magic exists?" In less than half an hour, a car stopped outside the door at lightning speed. Mr. and Mrs. Gray even forgot to take out the car keys and ran down in a hurry. Wade went out to greet them, but before he could say hello, he was almost choked by a hug that rushed over. "Oh my God. Oh, my God. Vader, my dear, you are actually admitted to Hogwarts. I am so happy. Really, I have waited for this day for too long. I thought you were like us, not having that chance." Her mother, Fiona, was sobbing and crying, her tears smearing her makeup and not caring about it. Wade's father, Ferdinand, hugged them. Although he didn't speak, his eyes were moist. The more Wade listened, the more uncomfortable he felt. "Wait, what do you mean? You guys," he broke away from his parents' suffocating embrace, "do you all know Hogwarts?" "Of course," Fiona said while wiping her tears with a handkerchief. "My mother and your grandparents are both wizards. I have been looking forward to going to Hogwarts since I was a child. It's just..." Ferdinand put his hands on the shoulders of his wife and children and pushed them into the house. "Go in and talk, so as not to be seen by ordinary people." After some explanation, Wade understood the whole story. It turns out that his grandparents and grandmother are both wizards, and the relationship between the two families is also very good. However, due to the war, Fiona and Ferdinand, who were born in exile, are both squibs, that is, they have magic genes but do not have the ability to cast magic. In the flames of war, it is difficult for the wizard himself to survive, let alone two squibs. After it was confirmed that they had no magical abilities, the two were sent to be raised by Muggle families. Over the years, they have completely adapted to Muggle life, but they have always hidden their longing for the magical world in their hearts. However, Vader has never shown any magical abilities since he was born. The two thought that he was also a squib. In order to prevent their children from experiencing the pain of expectation and disappointment like themselves, they concealed the existence of magic. I didn't expect you to be a wizard at all. I mean, I've actually been waiting for this period of time, but it's already July 30th and you haven't received the letter yet. I thought." Fiona cried and laughed, and was finally comforted by the father and son, who went to the bathroom to wash up. After calming down, Ferdinand looked at his 11-year-old son, with worry that could not be hidden in his eyes. "Hogwarts. Oh, Vader, I really don't know if, in your capacity, going to that school is a good thing." Who is Wade Gray? Although he is a descendant of wizards, his parents are both squibs, and he is no different from a muggle in the eyes of a real wizard. Ferdinand told Vader in detail about the wars caused by Grindelwald in modern times and the brutal killings caused by the second-generation Dark Lord. Even the last news they received about the magical world was that their parents were killed one after another because of the war. "Vade, you are very good and always make me and your mother proud. But you have to know that in the wizarding world, the first thing people value is origin. Pure blood, mixed blood, and Muggle-born are naturally divided into 3, 6, and 9 levels in the eyes of many people. About 10 years ago, the most powerful dark wizard at that time, the mysterious man, highly praised bloodline theory. He and his followers brutally murdered many Muggles and Muggle-born wizards, as well as purebloods who opposed him. My mother and I were also forced to completely cut off contact with the wizarding world at that time. Even if peace is restored now, there must be many wizards who believe that pure blood is supreme, and I have no doubt that they will combine this prejudice with malice passed on to their children. Vade, I'm worried. Hogwarts may not be as beautiful as we thought," Ferdinand said worriedly. After hearing this, Wade smiled quietly. "Don't worry, Dad, there must be classmates with the same background as me in the school. As long as I have enough friends around me, others won't dare to cause trouble for me easily, right?" He paused and then said, "And, no matter where you are, absolute strength can crush any prejudice. I will study hard and try to become the best one." After hearing this, Ferdinand was not very relaxed. He thought sadly, "But my son, you have never shown any magic ability. Maybe your magic power is only slightly stronger than that of a squib. How can there be any strength in this?" But to protect the young man's self-esteem, Ferdinand did not speak out his thoughts. Minerva McGonagall arrived faster than Vader expected. The day after receiving the letter, when the Wade family was having breakfast, they suddenly heard a knock on the door. Wade put down his knife and fork and opened the door. The moment he saw the person, he immediately recognized her identity. It's not that she looks exactly like the one in the movie. Vader has almost forgotten the plot of the movie he saw many years ago, and the image of the actor will not leave much memory. It's not because the serious-looking lady in front of her is wearing a conspicuous green robe. Ordinary people wouldn't dress like this at all. It's because there is a string of handwritten names above her head. Minerva McGonagall. Vader was silent, and doubts arose in his heart again. Is all this true? Or is it not the world of Harry Potter that he traveled through, but the game world called Harry Potter? I am just an NPC who has awakened his past life memories and self-awareness. Hello, Mr. Grey. While Vader was thinking wildly, Minerva McGonagall tried her best to smile gently, but she still looked serious. I am Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts and Professor of Transfiguration. Wade hurriedly retracted his wandering thoughts. Welcome, Professor McGonagall, please come in and have a cup of tea. The Grey couple heard the sound and hurried out. They looked in awe at this wizard who seemed to be mysterious and difficult to get along with. For a moment, they couldn't find their own voice and stammered. Yes, welcome, Professor, Madam, please come in and sit down. Ferdinand smiled warmly and glanced hastily at his son, as if he was worried that he would be cursed by the wizard. Wade was much more calm, because he knew that this lady was an extremely decent and kind-hearted person. He controlled his gaze not to look at the other person's head, and opened the door sideways to invite the other person to come in. Mag came here this time, firstly, to prove the authenticity of the magic school and persuade the couple to allow their children to go to school, secondly, to take Wade to buy school supplies. She has met many Muggle families who don't believe in magic, suspect that she wants to capture their children for secret experiments, or prefer that their children go to Muggle schools, so she has prepared several tricks in advance. However, this family did not question magic too much. Instead, they were more concerned about the reading environment, which made her complete the previous task very easy. So not long after, the group arrived at Charing Cross Road in London, and Professor McGonagall took them into the dirty and small Leaky Cauldron pub. Probably because it was too early, there were not many customers in the bar. A hunchbacked man who was cleaning the table said hello, "Good morning, Professor McGonagall." He glanced at the family of three dressed as Muggles, focusing on Vader, who was much shorter than the others, and said casually, "Is this kid the new student at Hogwarts this year?" "Good morning, Tom," Professor McGonagall said. "I brought Mr. Grey here to buy the things he needs for admission." Several people walked through the bar and walked to the small patio at the back. Professor McGonagall stood next to the trash can and took out his wand and pointed. "Mr. Grey, please remember this place. If you want to enter Diagon Alley, you need to go through here. Pass. 3 pieces on the top and 2 pieces on the side." The wand tapped 3 times on a wall tile. The bricks on the wall all moved, as if an invisible hand was adjusting their shape. In the blink of an eye, a wide arch appeared on the wall, and noisy voices rushed in. "Wow," the Grey family couldn't help but exclaimed. In front of them was a winding street, with shops on both sides full of dazzling goods, selling all kinds of strange things. People wearing wizard robes came and went, bargaining, children and parents acting coquettish, chasing and playing, giving people an extremely noisy and lively feeling. McGonagall led the 3 of them through many shops and came to Gringotts. Ferdinand had already prepared the money to be exchanged. He took out a large bag of jingling pounds and exchanged it for 50 gold galleons. Before leaving, Professor McGonagall reminded them that the number of Muggle banknotes that could be exchanged in Gringotts was limited, but there was no limit on metal coins or gold, jewelry, etc. Then, under the guidance of Professor McGonagall, they bought uniforms, textbooks, scales, cauldrons, wands and other items for school, and finally bought an owl as a pet. Accompanied by Professor McGonagall of Hogwarts, the shopkeepers were polite even when they saw them wearing Muggle clothes. By the way, Wade's wand is made of poplar wood with unicorn hair, 12 inches about 30 centimeters long. Poplar wood symbolizes rebirth, and Wade felt very wonderful. It was as if his secrets were seen through by this wand. After shopping, Professor McGonagall sent the family out of Diagon Alley and left. She also had the next little wizard who needed guidance. The Greys stood outside the leaky cauldron, looking at each other and grinning at the same time. Find a hotel first. I see there seems to be accommodation above the leaky cauldron. Don't. What if you meet a bad guy among wizards? It's more peaceful to stay in an ordinary hotel. That's right, Miss Fiona. I remember that there is a hotel with a nice environment nearby, and you can bring pets. Then what are you waiting for? Let's go. Wade pretended to be helpless and shook his head, carrying the owl's cage. One of the couple helped him hold the book, and the other carried the crucible and other items, and quickly went to the hotel to check in. After putting down their things, they were back in front of the leaky cauldron within half an hour. After entering the door, the Greys took out their bags and took out a wizard's robe. Seeing Vader looking at them in surprise, Fiona blinked and whispered, "While you were custom making your clothes, I took the opportunity to buy the finished wizard robe. Don't be stunned, there is one for you too, go and put it on." The three of them put on their robes in the corner. Fortunately, the weather was hot in summer, so they wore less, so the robes did not look bulky when they were put on. Fiona also added a hooded cloak to herself. Once she wore the hood, only a small piece of her chin could be seen on her entire face, making her look very cold and mysterious. At this point, they seemed to be able to blend in with the mysterious and dim atmosphere of the bar. Ferdinand pretended to be a regular customer and ordered a lunch. While waiting for the meal, he whispered to the two of them, "Although this restaurant may be a bit unhygienic, I want to try it." "Yeah," Fiona nodded and said solemnly, "I understand. Me too." "What's the difference?" Wade complained. "What's the best British food?" "Foreign food." Sure enough, when lunch was served, the Greys stared at it for a long time, unable to muster up the courage to eat on the dark and dirty table with the unwashed fork. Finally, Fiona picked up the bread with a handkerchief and reluctantly took a few bites, while Ferdinand drank a few sips of rum. "It's no different. It tastes worse than the ones bought in supermarkets." While talking, the door suddenly rang, and a huge figure completely blocked the light in front of the door. The Greys looked up and gasped. "Oh, my God," Ferdinand groaned and subconsciously stood in front of his wife and children, God bless. An extremely tall and burly man stood there. He squeezed in through the doorway with his head almost touching the ceiling. His presence was so strong that most people completely ignored the little person walking in front of him. Only Vader looked at the thin child, and as expected, he saw above the other person's head, Harry Potter and Tom Riddle. Different from the panic of the Greys, everyone else in the bar was very happy to see the big man. Everyone greeted him with a smile. The bar owner's tone was also a little more enthusiastic. As per the old rules, Hagrid. "No, Tom, I'm working for Hogwarts," the giant said honestly. "Great, he doesn't look like a dangerous person." Ferdinand breathed a sigh of relief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "What did he say, Hogwarts?" Fiona noticed what the other party said. "Wade, is that a teacher at the school too?" She craned her neck to look over, only to see everyone else in the bar stand up and gather around, lining up to shake hands with the kid, brought by the big man. Oh, it looks like a big shot is here." Fiona immediately jumped up, threw down the bread with only one corner missing, and shouted, "Hurry up. Fetty, Wade, let's go too." Ferdinand never refused her whims and requests unless necessary, let alone such trivial matters. So he pushed the chair away and walked over, shaking hands with the boy like the others, and said solemnly, "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Potter." As if he actually knew who Harry Potter was. Surrounded, Harry Potter couldn't help but shake hands with strangers one after another, listening to their admiration and compliments. He accidentally met the eyes of the black-haired boy at the back of the crowd, and he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed when the other person looked at him curiously. Harry still couldn't adapt to the fact that he suddenly became a celebrity. He always felt that this kind of fame seemed to be stolen. And Vader has already looked at another person. A pale young man with a purple scarf on his head tentatively approached Harry Potter. He looked very nervous and stammered, as if he was easily frightened. Seeing this, Fiona kindly made way for him so that he could shake hands with the famous Harry Potter. In Wade's eyes, that young man also had two almost overlapping names. Quillinas Quirrell, Tom Riddle. Wow, wizards seem to be no different from ordinary people. They can also chase stars. Fiona was still very excited when she came back, and Wade didn't understand what she was excited about. Is that kid a child star in the wizarding world? Everyone seems to know him, Fiona said. Judging from his age, he should be Wade's classmate. Ferdinand was not confused by the enthusiasm of the crowd and saw more things, but the kid looks a little malnourished, his clothes don't fit well, and he doesn't seem to be treated well by his guardian. Unlikely, Fiona guessed. Clothes. I guess they are popular in the wizarding world. These wizards don't seem to understand how ordinary people dress. Well, maybe. Ferdinand looked at his son. Wade, we just saw a professor from Hogwarts, the young man with a purple turban. You really should come over to meet him in advance. Forget it, I don't think that professor is very reliable, Wade said without interest. Ferdinand thought about it and found it difficult to refute for a while, because he also doubted the level of the professor, because he couldn't even speak a complete sentence fluently. Forget it, we've almost finished eating. Fiona pushed the plate away, pretending not to notice that most of the lunch was left, and said excitedly, let's continue shopping. How could a quick trip to such a wonderful Diagon Alley satisfy their curiosity about the magical world? Returning to Diagon Alley, it was as lively as in the morning, but without the serious Professor McGonagall, the Grey family relaxed a lot and shopping became more interesting. The Grey family visited almost every store seriously, well, except for one store that sold animal offal and eyeballs. As soon as they entered the door, they saw a huge, skeletal eyeball. Fiona was so frightened that she screamed and ran out. Ferdinand bought some exquisite magical artifacts, such as a broom that automatically sweeps the floor, a golden bird that can fly around, and a talking wizard chess, etc. When paying, he checked with the clerk again and again that there was absolutely nothing on these items. Add any dangerous or harmful magic. Wade spent more than an hour in the bookstore. He had too many books he wanted to buy. But considering that there was only 1 month left before school, and there must be more books in Hogwarts, he finally picked only the few books he wanted most: Common Spells and Solutions, Healing Manual, and Ancient Spells. A simple introduction to magic writing. He also bought 2 quill pens that can write automatically, but the clerk reminded him that these pens are not suitable for writing homework because they write down all the thoughts in the owner's mind on parchment in detail, even if they are specially trained. Anyone who has experienced this may accidentally write something that will kill them. When Wade walked out of the bookstore with the new book in his arms, he saw his parents sitting next to the ice cream stall on the street eating ice cream. Ferdinand was also holding a golden owl cage in his hand, and squatting inside was an especially strong-looking owl. The little guy is drawing a circle with his head. Dad, did you buy another owl? Wade asked. That's right, Ferdinand smiled. Considering that you must take your owl with you to school, what if your mother and I want to send you a letter? I heard that the Muggle post office cannot send letters to Hogwarts, so we bought one too. By the way, his name is General Bud, and he's a mighty young man. Vader bent down and said hello, General Bud. General Batter opened his mouth and yawned. Look, I also bought a little guy. Fiona came over and opened her hand. A small white hamster shrank in her hand, looking very well behaved. It's cute, isn't it? Fiona said in a surprised tone. I discovered that the pets in the wizarding world may have taken smart pills or something like that. They seem to be much smarter than ordinary animals. She is not afraid of people at all. Seems to still understand my orders. Cute is cute, but Mom, hamster seems to be on the owl's diet, right? Wade asked. He also bought an owl and bought owl food under the recommendation of the store clerk. He then learned that owls mainly eat rodents, birds, fish or insects. In short, they are carnivores. Thinking about the handful of pine nuts he had caught for the school owl, Wade secretly apologized in his heart. It doesn't matter, your father will take good care of his owl. Well, by the way, this is Miss Miriam, Fiona said seriously. Wade, it's time for you to give your owl a name. Well, Wade glanced around and happened to see an Avant stationery store. The letters Eva at the beginning were shining brightly in the sun, which was very conspicuous. Just call her Ava, he said casually. The Grey family has been hanging out in Diagon Alley for several days. Ferdinand can already discuss Quidditch games and various models of Nimbus 2000 with others without any obstacles. Fiona has bought one for her hamster Miss Miriam. A complete set of miniature furniture with a self-cleaning spell cast on it and an assortment of tiny dresses, wizard robes, hats and rainbow-colored socks. Of course, as the parents of a new student at Hogwarts, they signed a confidentiality agreement with Professor McGonagall on the first day, promising not to tell any non-magical people about the magical world and fulfilling their obligation to keep it safe. Keep magic items out of the Muggle world. A month goes by in a blink of an eye. On the morning of September 1st, Fiona helped Wade check his suitcase again, making sure that he had everything he should bring, from nail clippers and ear picks to autumn and winter clothes, packed into the suitcase. Ferdinand drove him to King's Cross Station. Platform 9 3/4, this is the starting point of the magical journey. From the appearance, it is just an ordinary partition wall. Wade pushed the box with an owl cage on the cart. He walked to the front of the partition wall, then turned around and saw his parents smiling and waving to him. Wade also smiled and waved, then turned around and rushed through the partition wall in one breath. Fiona covered her mouth and let out a sudden sob. Ferdinand put his arm around her shoulders and sighed, "If we could go to the platform to see him off." "Don't tell him, I don't want Wade to feel sad." Fiona sobbed and said, "Go to school, you should go to school happily." Ferdinand patted her gently and comforted her. "Don't worry, I have inquired a lot about the news in the past few days. The wizarding world is very peaceful now. Dumbledore, the greatest wizard in the world, is their principal, and Vader is in the school. It'll be fine." "Yes, I'm sorry." A timid voice sounded next to him. Ferdinand looked down and immediately recognized the boy in front of him. "Are you Harry Potter?" he said in surprise. "Yes, it's me." Harry uncomfortably pushed his hair on his forehead to cover the scar. He had forgotten that he had seen the couple in the leaky cauldron before, mainly because there were too many people shaking hands with him at the time, and the light in the bar was very dim. At this time, he asked cautiously with a bit of joy, "I just heard you talking about Hogwarts. I mean, I don't quite know how to get there." "Oh," Ferdinand suddenly realized. "Do you see that wall? Just push the box and rush over. If you are afraid, just close your eyes. Don't worry about being hit." This was not told to them by Professor McGonagall, but what Ferdinand heard from his parents when he was a child. At that time, he had not yet been confirmed to be a squib, and his parents told him many stories about the wizarding world. But later, they never mentioned those things again. "Oh, okay." Harry was a little bit unbelievable. He tentatively looked at the couple's faces. They looked very kind, but he didn't know if they were teasing him. Seeing that the other party had been looking at him with encouraging eyes, as if waiting to see him through the wall, Harry, who was embarrassed to ask others, gritted his teeth and pushed the box over, not very fast. "Stop when you hit the wall. It's no big deal to be laughed at." The boy thought so nervously in his heart, but he never waited for the expected obstacle. At a certain moment, his ears were suddenly full of buzzing voices, and what suddenly appeared in front of him was a huge, crimson train, with endless tracks winding into the distance. While Harry was dragging his heavy suitcase through the crowd, Wade had already found an empty compartment and sat down. While no one was around, he changed into his school robe in advance, took out Monsters and Where to Find Them, and started reading. In a month, Vader has roughly read all the books he bought. In terms of content, Monsters and Where to Find Them, alias Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, is his favorite. Of course, this love may also be due to the author. The author of this book, Newt Scamander, is the protagonist of another Harry Potter film series. He has a deep affection for all kinds of magical creatures, love, and a magic box that makes Vader extremely envious. After a while, the cubicle door suddenly opened. A little brown-haired girl stood at the door, looked at it, raised her chin and asked, "Excuse me, is there anyone else coming here?" Wade glanced at her rather conspicuous pair of front teeth and said, "No." "Oh." The little girl dragged the box in. After sitting down, she raised her head and said, "Hello, I am Hermione Granger." Vader put down the book, stretched out his hand and said, "Vade Grey. Are you reading Monsters and Where to Find Them? So you are a freshman this year." "Me too. By the way, I have memorized all the contents of this book, and of course, the other textbooks as well." Hermione was furious. He said with a little pride, "By the way, I also practiced a few simple spells, and they all worked. For example, like this, Luos for Flash." The tip of her wand lit up with a soft glow. Although I didn't memorize the textbook, but Vader also took out his wand, luminescence flashes. The two small light bulbs reflected each other, as if they were proof of the same kind. Hermione grinned and whispered with a bit of yearning, "It's amazing, isn't it?" Wade nodded silently. Hermione suddenly remembered something and quickly explained, "Oh, I am an ordinary person. I am a muggle. No one in my family knows magic. This kind of trick should be commonplace for you, right?" Vader said, "No, my parents don't know magic either." "Then we can help each other at school," Hermione said happily. "I mean, children from wizarding families must have studied with their parents since they were young and mastered a lot of magic, right? I don't want to be the worst among the students. The bad one." "Don't worry about that." Wade couldn't help laughing and said, "I'm sure there are not many people who can memorize the textbook. Maybe you are the only one. You are really amazing, Miss Granger." "Well, this actually doesn't, I mean, some of the content is quite difficult, and there are some spells that I didn't dare to try at home, because the book said that saying the wrong spell will have terrible consequences." Min stammered, blushing. When she was embarrassed, the door of the compartment was pushed open again. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief and immediately looked towards the door. A boy with a round face stood hesitantly at the door and asked hesitantly, "I'm sorry, can I sit here?" "Of course, come in," Hermione said enthusiastically first. The boy put the box away awkwardly, sat down and wrung his fingers nervously, as if he rarely interacted with others. Hermione took the initiative and said, "Hello. I am Hermione Granger, and he is Vader Gray. We are both freshmen this year. What is your name?" "Neville," he said. "My name is Neville Longbottom." "Well, a freshman too." "Oh, are you also from a non-magical family?" Hermione asked curiously. Neville lowered his head. "No, my parents are both wizards." "Then you must know a lot of magic," Hermione said. "I have only mastered a few simple spells, Luos for Blink and Repair to Original, but the petrification spell is still a bit uncertain. It should be Petrificus Totalus, or Petrificus Totalus." Neville was confused. "Pay Petri what?" Hermione blinked, as if she didn't understand what he was asking. Neville said with a sad face, Actually I haven't even mastered fluorescent flashing yet." Oh, Hermione was a little disappointed, but also a little happy. She puffed up her chest slightly and said, "Well, it doesn't matter, I can teach you, I mean, we can learn from each other." Neville looked like he was about to cry. "Neville," Vader suddenly said, "what is moving in your pocket?" Neville looked down and said, "It's my pet. It always likes to run around." He took out a black-gray toad from his pocket, held it in his palm and happily introduced it to the two of them. "Look, it's called Leaf." Vader and Hermione leaned back in unison, trying to distance themselves from the ugly creature without being noticed by Neville. The short and fat toad stretched his legs, jumped out of Neville's hand. It happened that Neville had not closed the compartment door when he came in, so Mr. Leaf ran to freedom without hesitation, and disappeared after 2 bounces. Neville looked at his empty palm, froze for 2 seconds, and screamed, "Lefu." He chased out, and Wade heard the sound of the boy accidentally hitting the car. The 2 people in the cubicle looked at each other. Hermione whispered, "Although it is written in the notice. I originally thought that no one would keep a toad as a pet." Wade nodded sympathetically. He knew that some golden, pink or emerald green toads were indeed pretty, but how could anyone really like those gray, pimple-covered toads? Neville just really liked his toad. After a while, the boy came back wiping his tears and said in tears, "I didn't find it, everyone said they didn't see it." Wade advised him, "The train is closed. If you look for it when you get off the train, you will definitely find it." Presumably no one would steal a toad. Neville was not comforted, tears were still falling down. Seeing that he was really sad, Hermione sighed helplessly, stood up and said, "I'll go look for him with you." She asked Vader with her eyes. Vader shook his head. Hermione and Neville left, and the originally noisy box immediately became quiet. Wade looked out the window and saw the rolling hills slowly moving back. He knew that if he went to look for toads with Hermione and the others, he would meet Harry and Ron, and 11-year-olds could easily become friends. In this way, the Iron Triangle will become a 4-person party. But after thinking for a long time, Wade still felt that there was no need to hug the protagonist's thigh, because what attracted him was not the adventure story of ordinary elementary school students fighting against the big devil in this year's drama. The magic itself was interesting enough. Hermione and Neville walked around the entire train, but they didn't find the escaped toad. Fortunately, Neville had gotten over the sadness of his pet's escape, or maybe not, because he was still depressed, but at least he wasn't crying anymore. Hermione was surprised to see a pile of snacks on the table when she entered the door, and asked, "What are these?" "A lady selling snacks just came here." Wade gestured. "Look, I bought a lot. Strawberry custard, chocolate balls, pumpkin tarts, pot cakes, and fruit juice, let's eat them together." "Oh, Neville, do you want to try this mint toad?" Neville took a bite while chanting, "Riff," and his eyes suddenly lit up. "It's delicious." Hermione didn't refuse. She sat down generously and took a piece of cake, saying, "Thank you, I'm hungry too. By the way, you won't believe that Harry Potter is in the compartment less than 10 meters away from us. Do you know Harry Potter?" Quote. Of course, his name is mentioned in Important Magical Events of the 20th Century. Wade said while unpacking the chocolate beans, "But I think it's better not to disturb him. He also lost his parents on the night he became a hero. If it were me, I would rather not have this honor." Quote. Hermione was stunned. You were right, I didn't expect." Neville lowered his head, and his hand holding the mint toad tightened slightly. The Potter family's sacrifice and honor are world famous, but not many people know that during that time, the Death Eaters captured Neville's parents and tortured them crazy in order to find the missing Voldemort. The boy hid these dark things in his heart, and several people had a full meal. Wade thought that there would be a lot of snacks left over, but the train kept clanging for a long time. It was dark, but they still hadn't reached their destination. The snacks on the table had been eaten by the three of them. The sales witch was nowhere to be seen, and they hadn't found their dinner yet. "Isn't Hogwarts in England?" Hermione stood up angrily and said, "I'm going to ask the driver when we can get there." "Let's go together." This time Wade stood up. He was a little curious about the train driver who might only work 4 times a year. He didn't know who was doing this job. Neville followed him. He wanted to look for his pet again. The train driver was an ordinary brown-haired man. He was smoking a pipe, had a stubble on his face, and had a good temper. Facing the questioning of the 3 little wizards, he smiled and replied, "Don't worry, we'll be there soon. You will have dinner in Hogwarts Castle." Hermione went back contentedly. Passing by many compartments along the way, Wade also casually observed them. They were all unfamiliar faces. He only recognized the Weasley twins. Their compartment was very lively. He could hear cheers and laughter from a long distance. He didn't know what interesting tricks they were playing. Before reaching the compartment, he suddenly heard screams. 3 children stumbled through the aisle. One of the blonde boys pushed Neville and shouted, "Get out of the way. Don't block the way." "Hey." Hermione didn't call anyone and stomped her feet angrily. "Impolite guy." Wade reached out to support Neville, who almost fell. "Thank you," Neville said gratefully. Wade shook his head and said to Hermione, "You go change into your school robes first. We'll wait outside." Hermione nodded, swallowed her anger, stepped heavily into the compartment, locked the door, pulled the curtain, and quickly changed her clothes. Then it was Neville. Just as the 3 of them put all the things on their seats into the box, they heard the driver's voice echoing on the train. "We will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train and we will take you to school." The train slowed down and stopped at the platform. Hundreds of students rushed out like bees leaving their nests, and the dark and small platform was crowded with people. Hermione and Neville followed closely behind Wade, their faces pale. First-year students, follow me. Watch your feet." Not far away, a big man holding a lantern shouted in a loud voice. Wade and others squeezed through the crowd. They noticed that the old students went in another direction, but in front of the huge size of the gamekeeper Hagrid, no one dared to question it. A group of people walked through a dark path in the woods and finally saw a towering castle in the distance. Countless windows were shining with lights, and the light was reflected by the dark mirror-like lake, making the castle look particularly majestic. "Wow!" the freshmen exclaimed in unison. Under Hagrid's command, the group crossed the Black Lake in a boat and finally arrived at the bottom of the castle. Hagrid also found Neville's toad on a boat. Neville took his precious toad with great joy, and Hagrid knocked 3 times on the castle gate. The gate opened, and Professor McGonagall stood in front of the gate with a serious expression. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said. The sorting ceremony began. Hogwarts has 4 colleges, namely Gryffindor, Slytherin, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. A talking hat sorts students according to their talents and qualities. This is what Wade knew in his previous life. After traveling to this world for 11 years, he has actually forgotten many plots in novels or movies. But after finding himself in the world of Harry Potter, he thought back carefully, recalled many impressive plots, and recorded them in his own unique way. Before registering, Wade had of course carefully considered which college he wanted to go to. Although the sorting hat valued talent, it would also consider the student's own wishes. First of all, of course, exclude Slytherin. His parents are not wizards, and Slytherin, who values blood and family background, is afraid that he will be excluded by other students. Although Wade was not afraid of those teenagers, he was not interested in taking on difficult challenges. Gryffindor. Wade thought about it again and again, but still felt it wouldn't work. With Harry Potter here, Gryffindor is where the storm gathers, and all eyes are on them. Moreover, in the plot, most Gryffindors are a bit brainless. They were incited by rumors several times and isolated and excluded Harry Potter, who had made no mistakes, leaving a very bad impression on Vader. Similarly, Ravenclaw seems to have experienced bullying, teasing her classmates Luna Lovegood. It wouldn't be like this if it were Hufflepuff. Although most of Hufflepuff's students have mediocre grades, they are sincere, kind and trustworthy. As for being treated as a fool, so what? Vader believed that his mind would not change because of the academy. After making the decision, Vader seemed a bit more calm than the little wizards who thought they had to fight the giant monster. After the sorting hat sang a song, Professor McGonagall took a long list and assigned the freshmen to the corresponding houses, some very quickly, while others had to hesitate for a while. Suddenly, Wade heard a familiar name. Hermione Granger. Professor McGonagall shouted. Hermione ran over and put on her hat hastily. After a moment, the sorting hat shouted, "Gryffindor." There was loud applause from the Gryffindor table. Then, Vade Grey. Vader walked over quickly, put on the sorting hat, and said in his heart, "Hufflepuff. Hufflepuff. I want to go to Hufflepuff." Hufflepuff. A small voice said, "Oh, maybe you didn't listen to the song I just sang. It doesn't matter. I can sing a section for you alone. The people there are honest and loyal." Wade. He vaguely noticed something. The sorting hat continued singing. Hufflepuff students are tough and honest. Wade. Okay, I understand, no need to sing. Sorting hat. Not afraid of hard work. Wade. It's a bit too much. Your voice is a bit too loud. The sorting hat whispered. Although Hufflepuff never refuses any student who wants to go to Hogwarts, there is a place that is more suitable for you. Well, it is always difficult for people to recognize themselves, isn't it? Vader said in his mind, "I won't go to Slytherin." Of course, the sorting hat shouted, "Ravenclaw." The second row of tables on the left began to clap and applaud, and the applause was very controlled. Wade sighed in his heart, took off his hat and walked towards the table decorated with cyan and blue. The rigid sorting hat. What if you are not honest and hardworking? I just like to make friends with upright, honest, hardworking people, don't you? Several Ravenclaw students stood up and shook hands with him. The leading boy said, "Welcome to Ravenclaw. I am Westmore, the prefect of boys." Another boy came over and said, "Your name is Wade Grey. Then you are a perfect fit for our academy." "What do you mean?" Wade asked. "Oh, Benson, don't tell that joke of yours." West thought of something and said helplessly. Benson winked and said, "Because our house ghost is also named Grey, Ms. Grey." Wade looked at him, and after a few seconds said slowly, "Oh, so what?" "Benson." West pushed the boy's head back. "I told you a long time ago, don't imitate the Weasley twins, you don't have any funny blood." Benson lay on the table as if he was hit hard, his whole body turned gray. Wade thought his current expression was actually more funny. He sat on his seat and looked around. He needs no introduction. In his eyes, everyone around him has a name or two on their head. However, almost everyone in Ravenclaw had no impression of Vader, probably because it was not mentioned at all in the plot. The only exception was a very cute black-haired girl not far away diagonally opposite, Chu Jong. She was looking at the new students in the branch and did not pay attention to Wade's gaze. Everyone at the teacher's desk also compared with what they remembered: Albus Dumbledore with silver hair and long beard, Severus Snape with sallow face and greasy hair, as short as a 3-year-old child, Phileas Flitwick, the neurotic Sybil Trelawney, the fat Professor Sprout, and Quilinus Quirrell with one face in front and another in the back, and Tom Riddle. Of course, Vader, who was sitting on the long table in Ravenclaw, was like a transparent person, and the professors did not pay attention to him. The sorting ceremony is still going on. Michael Corner. Ravenclaw. Before Vader, a blonde boy named Anthony was sorted into Ravenclaw and was greeting everyone excitedly. Soon after, a boy with long black curly hair named Michael Corner came and sat next to Vader. Then came Padma Patil, the younger sister of a pair of Indian twin sisters. Her older sister Parvati Patil was sorted into Gryffindor. There are not many new students in Ravenclaw, there are only about 10 people in one after another. The new students observed the surroundings cautiously and excitedly, until a name suddenly rang out. Harry Potter. The entire auditorium fell silent, followed by buzzing discussions. Potter. Harry Potter. Is that Harry Potter? At the Ravenclaw table, some students who were originally aloof and did not pay much attention to the new students could not help but turn their heads and crane their necks to see the black-haired boy who walked in front of the sorting hat. When he put on the hat, many people waited with bated breath. From Gryffindor to Slytherin, from the Principal Dumbledore to the castle administrator Filch standing at the door, everyone was looking at the dirty hat. The dirty hat, and the little boy with most of his face covered under the hat. The voices gradually became quieter. Finally, Gryffindor. The sorting hat shouted, and there were enthusiastic cheers and applause in the auditorium. Gryffindor was the loudest among them, but almost everyone in Ravenclaw also applauded. This is a treatment that other people do not get when they are sorted. I already knew he would go to Gryffindor, Benson said to West seriously. Of course Harry Potter will be in Gryffindor, otherwise where else could he go? Shut up, Benson. 2 months ago you said Harry Potter was the person written in the book. In fact, he didn't exist at all. West rolled his eyes. As the last new student was sorted into Slytherin, Professor McGonagall left with the sorting hat, and Dumbledore stood up and opened his arms. Welcome, he said. Welcome everyone to Hogwarts to start the new school year. Before the banquet begins, I want to say a few words. That is, idiot, crying nose, residue, screw, thank you everyone. Upon hearing this classic opening statement, Wade applauded vigorously. What does he mean? Asked Michael, who was sitting next to him. I don't know, Wade said. Then you applaud? Michael asked with raised eyebrows. Isn't such a short speech worthy of applause? Wade asked rhetorically. Michael thought for a while and agreed. You are right. Warm applause accompanied the cheers, and in the blink of an eye, a lot of food appeared on the empty long table, such as roast beef, lamb chops, potato chips, mashed potatoes, etc. Although there were a little less vegetables, the aroma was rich and delicious, delicious. The students, who had been hungry for a long time, immediately feasted. After almost everyone was full, the main meal disappeared and many desserts appeared on the long table. The students, whose stomachs were full, had to slow down to taste and take time to chat with the people around them. The conversation among the new students naturally focused on their family background and lineage. A boy named Stephen said, I was born into a pure-blood family. My mother is also a Ravenclaw and my father is a Gryffindor. I have read all the textbooks in school when I was at home. What about you, Wade? Someone asked. Vader said candidly, neither of my parents knew magic. Then magic must be a completely unfamiliar field to you, right? Stephen said in a sympathetic tone, you will have to work harder at school. Well, I will try my best, Wade said with a smile. Although I'm a mixed race, I think it doesn't matter whether it's pure blood or hemp seed. Michael next to him said to Wade, just like my family, my father is a wizard, but he is not as smart as my mother. My mother decides everything. Vader Gray's last name is G, Hermione Granger's is Granger, and Harry Potter's last name is P, instead of B, so Vader was behind Hermione and in front of Harry when he was sorted. Dear Mom and Dad, although I just left home, I already miss you. I hope you are in good health and happy. Yesterday we took a crimson steam train to Hogwarts. The school is a majestic castle with meadows, forests and lakes nearby. I have to say that the scenery here in the morning is very charming. It was already evening when we arrived at the school, and the first thing was the sorting. I think you also know that Hogwarts is divided into 4 colleges: the brave and generous Gryffindor, the upright and loyal Hufflepuff, the wise and knowledgeable Ravenclaw, and the ambitious Slytherin. Wade paused slightly when writing here. He suddenly thought that among the 4 colleges, the other 3 colleges valued the quality of students when enrolling, but Ravenclaw only required ability. So, smart and brave people may go to Gryffindor, such as Dumbledore and Hermione. Smart and loyal people are admitted to Hufflepuff, such as Scamander, the protagonist of the Fantastic Beasts series, and Cedric. Smart and ambitious people are in Slytherin, such as Voldemort and Snape. So what about the smart people who stay in Ravenclaw? Maybe they are smart and quick-witted, but smart people are often better at seeking benefits and avoiding harm, and are more likely to retreat in the face of difficulties and dangers, choosing a more relaxed and beneficial way for themselves. In order to achieve something, in addition to the mind, spiritual qualities are the core of the driving force, either to move forward courageously, or to be tenacious, or to be ambitious. Smart people who are immersed in their own world and do their own thing often become weirdos in the eyes of others. So in the plot, Ravenclaw has the least presence among the 4 colleges of Hogwarts. The Ravenclaw members who appeared, whether they are studying or have graduated, except Chu Jong, are more or less neurotic. Thinking of the Sorting Hat saying that he was the most suitable for Ravenclaw, Wade frowned somewhat unhappily. Then he thought again. What kind of person he was not something that a hat could decide. Moreover, the Sorting Hat had made mistakes more than once or twice, such as when it sorted the cowardly Peter Pettigrew into Gryffindor. Wade paused for a moment and continued to write. A talking hat sorted me into Ravenclaw, which I think is the best recognition of my mind. I do intend to learn as much as possible during the 7 years of studying, because I heard that there is no place in the whole of Britain with a richer collection of books than Hogwarts. It must be said that the wizarding world is far less far-sighted than the Muggle government in this regard. There is no so-called public library here. The precious books are either hidden in the school or in the private study of some aristocratic families. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore is a somewhat strange person. He has long silver-white hair and a silver-white beard. His temperament is exactly the same as the mysterious wizard that people imagine, just like a living Merlin. Can you imagine it? His speech at the opening ceremony was, "Idiot, crybaby, scum, twist." No one probably knew what it meant. But even though I didn't understand it, it was much better than the long and boring speech. Because after he finished his speech, many delicacies appeared on our table. Yes, they appeared suddenly. Magic is really magical, and we were all very hungry at that time. While being a little weird, this professor is also very humorous, kind, and gentle. He is also the greatest wizard of the contemporary era. A classmate from a wizard family told me that because of Dumbledore, Hogwarts is also recognized as the safest place in the world. So you don't have to worry about me encountering any danger in school. The students here will not curse others for no reason. They are no different from children in ordinary schools. In addition, my college, Ravenclaw, has a separate tower located on the west side of the castle. After dinner, the college prefect led us to the tower. We had to answer the door knocker questions correctly to enter the lounge. The lounge is a very wide round room, with many stars painted on the dark blue dome and the thick carpet covered with stars, which looks quiet and elegant. There are many arched windows around, with bronze silk hanging down. Through the windows, you can see the mountains and wilderness in the distance, as well as the Quidditch field in the school. The dormitory is in the corner building next to the tower. I have to say, it really takes a lot of stairs to go back to the dormitory. However, the old students said that the school stairs are often more friendly to Ravenclaw students, and they will not move around to tease us. Sometimes they will make a shortcut, which can save at least half of the journey, perhaps because the ever-changing stairs in the castle are designed by the founder of the college, Ms. Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw students have the least number of students among the 4 colleges. The dormitory is a double room, and there is just one more male student, so, you should have guessed it. I seized the opportunity to quickly apply for it, and finally luckily got a single room. There are warm beds, wardrobes, desks and bookshelves in the dormitory, as well as a separate bathroom, and all daily necessities are prepared. We didn't need to do laundry or clean the room. There was a group of invisible helpers in the castle. When we woke up, everything was in perfect order. They probably sent my suitcase to the dormitory. Thank God, I didn't have to carry it up the spiral staircase by myself. Students in the college are easy to get along with, and West takes good care of the freshmen. Because he was worried that some students would get lost, he waited in the lounge early this morning and took us to the hall for breakfast. At the same time, he also gave us the schedule for this semester. I have to say that the schedule is very easy, which is the least worrying part. After breakfast, West took us around the school and told us where to go for each class, which places are prohibited from entering the school, and shortcuts to places such as the library, the school clinic, and the Quidditch field. We will have flying lessons soon, and I will ride a flying broom for the first time. It's exciting, isn't it? In the past, I never thought that we humans could fly in the sky like birds. Of course, I will follow the professor's instructions, pay attention to safety, and avoid injuries. Finally, I want to say that Hogwarts is a great school. I like it here. Love you, Ved Grey. As a human being in 2 lives, Ved is not as heartless as ordinary children. He knows very well how worried parents who love their children will be when their children leave home. Therefore, Wade took advantage of the free time before class to write down everything that happened when he came to school, and even hand-painted a simple diagram of the school layout and put it in the letter paper. After writing the letter, Wade reviewed it again and changed the ambitious Slytherin to shrewd and proud. It's not that he wanted to praise Slytherin College, but he didn't want his parents to find out the possible conflicts between colleges from the wording and sentence structure, and then start to worry about his situation, because the Grey couple's impression of the wizarding world is still at the stage when the Dark Lord is rampant. After Wade received the Hogwarts admission letter, they have been secretly feeling guilty and worried about their identity as a squib. Wade wanted to tell them, it's okay, the war is over, the bloodline theory is not the mainstream, everything is good in Hogwarts now, his origin is not an obstacle to him, and his parents are not a burden to him. He was always grateful to be their child. The first-year class schedule at Hogwarts is very relaxed. For example, on Monday, Vader only had 2 potions classes in the morning. After breakfast, a group of Ravenclaw freshmen walked to the underground classroom together. As the environment gradually became colder, the students' faces gradually became a little pale. I heard that Professor Snape, who teaches potions class, is the dean of Slytherin House. Michael, who was walking next to Vader, took the initiative to talk to him in order to ease the tense atmosphere. Did you notice it during the sorting last night? It's the teacher with black hair and a hooked nose. Of course, Padma said. I have to say, we'd better not provoke him. Everyone arrived at the potions classroom in silence. There were rows of glass jars in the cabinets against the wall, containing various animal specimens. Some timid children seemed to be scared to cry when they looked at them, and they sat down tremblingly. The farthest point from the specimen. Wade directly chose the corner position. He was not afraid of dead specimens, but he was worried that some classmates would make mistakes and harm himself. After a while, Hufflepuff students arrived in droves, and their reactions were similar to those of the new Ravenclaw students. However, Ravenclaw, who came first, had already taken advantage of the situation, and the Hufflepuff students had to disperse to the edge. There were also 2 more Hufflepuff students near Vader's originally empty corner. Hello, my name is Theo Mancini. He is Ryan Caro. The brown-haired Hufflepuff boy was the first to greet Wade. Excuse me, who are you? Vade Grey. Vade, Theo Mancini asked curiously. Do you know the professor of our class? The blonde boy named Ryan suddenly said, Theo, stop talking. He said, the professor is here. As soon as he finished speaking, the classroom door was slammed open, and a man in black wizard robes strode in. His face was cold and menacing. Many students subconsciously shrank their necks, and the classroom suddenly became silent. Snape scanned the students in the classroom, took out the roster and began to call names. Seeing that no one was late for the first period, his expression finally softened a little. Potion is a very precise course, Snape said in a low voice like a whisper. Strict procedures and precise proportions need to be followed. If anyone changes the potion formula without authorization, or arbitrarily adding or subtracting material components, or foolishly waving a magic wand in an attempt to cover up a mistake. His cold eyes swept over the silent new students, focusing on the Hufflepuff students wearing yellow and black striped ties. I will make him realize deeply what terrible consequences the wrong potion will bring. Theo swallowed nervously, as if Snape's words meant something to him. Vader suddenly felt something was wrong. He chose a corner position to avoid interference, but there seemed to be a landmine buried next to him. As if there was a radar on his head, Snape immediately caught some kind of Cub's apprehension and said without even looking at the roster, "Theo Mancini." "Yes." Theo stood up in a hurry, almost knocking the crucible over. "Yes, Professor." "How do you deal with slugs when making scabies potion?" asked Snape. 7 or 8 arms were raised in the classroom, most of them were Ravenclaw students. The good news, Snape didn't go out of his way to make things difficult for the students. The questions he asked were exactly what was in the first chapter of the textbook. Bad news, Theo didn't preview the textbook ahead of time. The boy said shakily, I don't know, sir." "Sit down," Snape said coldly. "For not previewing the text in advance, 1 point will be deducted from Hufflepuff." "Wade Grey." He casually nodded at the Ravenclaw sitting next to him. Wade stood up immediately. "Cook for 5 minutes, sir." "Correct answer." Snape nodded, but instead of giving points to Ravenclaw, he immediately asked another question. "Michael Corner, what is the role of nettles?" "Yes, it can treat inflammation, hair loss, and stop bleeding," Michael stammered. "Not bad." Snape nodded and told him to sit down, and then asked, "Hannah Abbott, when should the porcupine quills be added?" The blonde girl stood up with tears in her eyes, as if Snape would burst into tears if he said another word. Snape looked away and called the other person's name, Ryan Caro. Ryan had already quickly opened the book and read it when he started to ask the question. This question was specifically emphasized in the book. "After turning off the engine, Professor," Ryan said as calmly as possible. Snape glanced down and glanced at the textbook he had opened. "I hope you can put the knowledge into your mind in advance instead of just rushing in during class to pray for Merlin's blessing." Ryan's mouth was still tight as he sat down, and Theo patted his arm comfortingly. Snape wasn't targeting anyone in this lesson, he was targeting everyone. The stormy question gave everyone a severe blow. When the explanation officially began, Hufflepuff had been deducted 13 points, and Ravenclaw had also been deducted 5 points. In silence, Snape began to instruct everyone to prepare the scabies potion. He divided everyone into groups of 2 according to their seats, and then waved his wand, and the detailed steps were listed on the blackboard. Everyone hurriedly took up their pens and wrote them down. Wade found that there were some minor adjustments between the content on the blackboard and the steps in the book. If they followed the content in the book completely, they might not be able to prepare the results that would satisfy the professor. "Sorry." Theo, who was in the same group with Wade according to his seat, whispered, "I didn't preview the text in advance, but I will try not to hold you back." His amber eyes were very sincere, and Wade's depressed mood because he was originally grouped with a student scumbag was relieved. "Nothing," Wade said, "the preparation of scabies potion is very simple. As long as you follow the steps, there shouldn't be much of a problem." Theo went to the shelf next to him to get the herbs. Wade weighed them on a scale and pushed the snake's fang to Theo with a knife. "You handle the materials, I'll be responsible for boiling." "Okay," Theo responded, put on protective dragon leather gloves, and then put the snake's fang into a mortar and ground it into powder. Wade picked up 4 slugs with tweezers and put them into the crucible to boil, while carefully controlling the heat with a magic wand. A few minutes later, Wade took out the discolored slugs and put them aside for later use. He changed the water and heated it again, and reviewed the boiling steps again. Theo next to him had already processed the snake's fang powder and was now chopping the dry nettles. Wade was a little surprised to find that although this Hufflepuff student looked a little clumsy, he was very careful. The processed powder was fine and uniform, without any rough particles or impurities. Maybe this partner is not bad, Vader thought. The water in the crucible soon emitted white gas. Wade added the snake fang powder and then the nettles. He stirred twice clockwise and 3 times counterclockwise. The crushed nettles melted quickly like ice cubes. At this time, there were sudden screams in the classroom, and a green smoke hissed out. Some students were yelling in pain as their skin was corroded by the failed potion. Theo was startled. "What's going on?" "Don't be distracted." Wade didn't even look over there. He kept silent for a few seconds and added the slug to the list. Theo, open the cauldron. Theo immediately executed it. He was still wearing dragon leather gloves while Wade waited a moment, added 2 porcupine quills, and stirred 5 times clockwise. The potion immediately underwent changes visible to the naked eye. The disgusting brown-green liquid quickly turned into a green, jelly-like color. This was exactly the color written in the book after the potion was successfully brewed. Theo looked at the potion in surprise, then at the book, and exclaimed, "It worked. Wade, you did it in one go." At the other end of the classroom, Snape, who had just dealt with a potion accident and scolded a few students, heard the sound and strode over. He lowered his head, examined it carefully, and finally looked at Theo nervously. With a look in his eyes he reluctantly said, "Not bad, it has reached the standard. 1 point added, for each person. It is said that Professor Snape rarely adds points to houses other than Slytherin. I mean, it would be great to be able to add back the deducted points." On the way after class, Theo excitedly told his friend Ryan said, "And after we finish the potion, we can use the remaining time to prepare the cough potion for the next class. Next time Professor Snape asks a question, I will never be unable to answer a sentence." Ryan was also happy for him and added, "The potions in our group have always been a bit poor, they exude a strange smell. I wonder if the brewing time is too short." "Hi, Vader," a voice came from behind. Michael quickly caught up with Vader and said, "I want to ask, how did you get that light green color?" "I also followed Professor Snape's steps exactly. I made it, but I don't know why, but the color is a bit dark. If there are no mistakes in the steps, it should be the difference in material processing." Wade looked at his partner Theo. Theo processed the materials perfectly. "Our final product has almost no impurities." Michael looked at the Hufflepuff in surprise. Theo didn't seem to be used to being praised. He blushed slightly and quickly changed the subject. "By the way, do you have classes in the afternoon? How about we go to the library to do homework together?" Before get out of class ended, Snape asked them to write a paper on scabies potion, at least 6 inches, about 15 centimeters. "Don't be so anxious, right?" Michael was not happy. "It's not due tomorrow, there are still several days until Friday." He automatically counted himself in, even though Theo initially only asked Vader and Ryan. "I'm going to the library." Wade said, "It's only 6 inches. I'll finish it quickly. I won't have to think about it all the time." Ryan also nodded. "Library." Michael was probably a bit of a procrastinator. He hesitated and looked longingly at the classmates who were discussing exploring the castle or taking a walk by the Black Lake. 2 girls giggled and invited Michael to go to the Quidditch pitch with them, but Michael didn't know why. He hesitated for a while, and finally trotted to join the 3 Vaders. "Aren't you going to play?" Wade asked him. Michael sighed. "If everyone goes to play, of course I want to go. But if someone goes to do homework in advance, I feel guilty when I play." The library of Hogwarts is on the west side of the castle. The space inside is much larger than it looks from the outside. Vader is sure that some kind of magic to expand the space is used here. The library is divided into several floors, with several stairs moving among them. The criss-crossing bookshelves are lined up silently, containing thousands of books. Between the bookshelves are rows of tan desks. On the first day of school, there were very few students in the library. When the 4 little wizards looked at the countless books in wonder at the entrance, the librarian Mrs. Pants noticed them immediately. She walked over quickly, looked down at the 4 of them, and asked, "New student?" Theo, who was standing at the front, nodded. "No scratching, tearing, folding, staining, damaging, throwing books, no making noise, no eating in the library, understand?" Mrs. Pants said sternly. Theo nodded quickly, as if he had a vision of Professor Snape. "You are not allowed to go to the restricted book area. You can read the books in the ordinary area, but you are not allowed to scribble on them. If you want to take them out of the library, you must get my permission. Remember." Everyone nodded together again. Mrs. Pants asked again, "What book are you looking for?" "Ah, scabies potion, books related to potions," Michael said. Mrs. Pants waved the wand in a circle, and a dozen books flew from several bookshelves. "These should be enough, go and study," Mrs. Pinksy said with a faint smile on her face. Several people hugged their books and found a seat by the window to sit down. Michael flipped through the pages, probably considering that there were 4 of them, two of each kind of book, and the thinnest one was an inch thick. This had to be seen when he flipped through a few books at random, but felt that he didn't understand a single word. He wondered if he could first copy 100 or 200 words from the text, and then find a book to excerpt a few sentences to make up the length. Then he heard the sound of a feather pen, swishing, across parchment next to him. "Ved," Michael asked in surprise, "did you know how to write so quickly?" "Huh." Ved didn't even raise his head. "It's not very difficult." There were a few books in front of him, and he wrote 4 or 5 lines in a short time, and the words were not particularly large. Not only Michael and Theo were dumbfounded, but even Ryan, who had never talked much, couldn't help but look at what Ved had written. Ved looked at the expressions of the crowd and realized that he had overlooked for a moment. The children in front of him were all 11 years old, not his classmates in college who could easily write 1,000 or 800-word essay. If these children were from wizard families, they would not even have received systematic school education. Even if they had attended elementary school in a Muggle school, they might not have written many essays. He didn't mind sharing his essay experience with a few people. Writing a paper is actually very simple. Wade pulled out a blank piece of parchment and whispered as he wrote on it, "Just build a simple framework and fill it with appropriate content. First, briefly introduce the scabies potion. Second, the history of this potion, such as who invented it and who improved it. Third, write about the configuration process and precautions. Fourth, analyze why the potion does not meet the standards, what accidents will occur if the configuration is improper, how to deal with the accidents, etc. Fifth, you can analyze in detail the effects of several materials and their reactions to each other. For this, please refer to 1000 Magical Herbs, and Common See Introduction to Magical Potion Materials. Sixth, write about the symptoms corresponding to the scabies potion, the causes of the disease, symptoms, potion usage, past cases, etc. You can also compare with similar potions, such as comparing their materials, brewing time, cost price, efficacy, etc. Finally, you can simply summarize and write down your own ideas. There are too many things to write about. You can choose 2 or 3 at random and you should be able to complete a qualified paper. Quote, "The 3 of them were silent for a long time, and suddenly they took out parchment at the same time and began to copy quickly, not to do homework, but to copy down everything Wade wrote. You are such a genius, Wade," Michael praised as he copied. "This is simply a thesis secret book." Theo nodded. "That's right. I feel that no matter what kind of paper I will write in the future, let alone 6 inches, I can write 6 feet. Ryan stopped writing. He thought about it, and said seriously, 6 feet is not good. 6 feet is still too much, I can't write it. Quote, Wade and the other 2 couldn't help laughing. Chapter 11. The afternoon class was History of Magic, and Ravenclaw and Slytherin attended the class together. Sitting in front of Wade was a boy with light blonde hair, and he was followed by 2 chubby little followers. Wade recognized the boy as Draco Malfoy, the villain who had been at loggerheads with the protagonist for 7 years in the original book. But the relationship between Slytherin and Ravenclaw was okay, and Malfoy did not spray venom at everyone. On the contrary, except that he spoke in a somewhat arrogant manner and liked to show off his family background and wealth intentionally or unintentionally, he was still polite in the classroom. However, he must have a different attitude towards his nemesis Harry Potter. When Professor Binns appeared in the classroom through the wall, Malfoy was still talking bad about Harry Potter to his followers, showing off the scar on his head all day long, as if it was so great, and hanging out with the stinky Weasleys. His whole body was covered with the shabby smell of their family. The surrounding Ravenclaws looked sideways and quietly distanced themselves from the Slytherins. No matter what happens in the future, Harry Potter is still a hero in the eyes of many wizards. These children in the school basically grew up listening to his stories. Draco Malfoy's words naturally disgusted everyone, and at the same time reminded others of some facts that have been covered up. I heard that Draco Malfoy's father is a Death Eater who follows the mysterious man, Michael whispered to Wade. It is said that after the mysterious man was defeated by Harry Potter, his father claimed that he was under the Imperius curse and donated a lot of money to the Ministry of Magic, so he escaped from prison. Look at his appearance, it is obvious that his father still hates Harry Potter for defeating his master, so he is influenced by his father. Wade shook his head secretly in his heart. He knew that Draco Malfoy must not have thought so much. He seemed to want to make friends with Harry Potter at first, but his arrogant attitude made Harry Potter look down on him. How could the arrogant young master suffer such grievances? So he persisted in opposing the savior. Don't take it lightly, and don't get close to Malfoy, Michael reminded. Their family is the one that cares most about bloodline among the 28 holy families. 28 holy families. This involves Wade's knowledge blind spot. It is 28 pure blood families. There are no muggles in their ancestors, and no one in the family has married with muggles. Michael said indifferently. But my father said it was all nonsense, because many of the families listed in the list have muggle ancestors, or they claim to have muggle ancestors. It must be said that the history of magic is indeed a boring class. Because the ghost Professor Binns who taught them has been teaching them in a hypnotic voice, reading from the book, neither asking questions nor caring about what the students are doing, speaking with a wheezing sound and unclear tone. In less than 5 minutes, half of the students in the classroom lay down, and the remaining half were basically either dozing off or secretly drawing squares on the parchment for taking notes to play chess games. Wade blocked out Professor Binns' hypnotic voice, drew a timeline on paper, and listed important dates, historical figures, and major events in the history of magic. These are also the things that are tested in the magic history exams in the wizarding world. On Wade's desk was a book called Hogwarts, A History of the School, borrowed from the library. Comparing the two, one can't help but wonder what kind of magnificent adventures and struggles the 4 founders of Hogwarts had in history, and what role Hogwarts played in the next 1,000 years. History itself is actually very interesting, but Professor Binns made this class unattractive. When the get-out of class was over, Professor Binns' voice stopped abruptly and slowly floated away through the wall. Wade woke up Michael, and the two went to the library together to complete the homework of the history of magic, a 1-foot-long paper on the reign of terror of the demon Emmerich. No one in the whole Hogwarts is more diligent than you, Michael muttered while doing his homework. I bet other students must wait until the last day to do their homework. Before he finished speaking, a shaky figure passed by the two of them. Hermione was carrying a thick stack of books. When she saw Wade, she stopped and put the books on the table. Michael felt that the whole desk shook. Hi, Wade, Hermione greeted him, sat down directly, and asked, how is Ravenclaw? Except that there are too many stairs to climb, there is nothing wrong. Wade introduced. Hermione, this is Michael Corner. Michael, this is Hermione Granger, we met on the train. Hello. Hermione was very brave and enthusiastic like a little lion. She stretched out her hand directly. Are you also a Ravenclaw? Michael looked at the height of the stack of books, swallowed his saliva, shook hands and hesitated, but, maybe. In front of these two people, he deeply felt that he might not be worthy of calling himself a Ravenclaw. Maybe. Hermione frowned. Feeling the blood pressure of some kind of biological chain, Michael's stature inexplicably shrank a little. He whispered, can I ask, why did you take so many books? Are you going to read them all? Of course. These are the books I plan to finish reading this week, Hermione said as a matter of course. Michael's face turned pale, and he looked at Wade with his eyes. What's going on? A week. More curious than you. Wade raised his eyebrows slightly at him. Michael stopped complaining about Wade dragging him to do homework and lowered his head to concentrate on completing the rest of his paper. Wade, who had already completed the paper, continued to make his own timeline. Oh, your method is quite useful. Hermione leaned over to take a look and suggested, but I think it would be more inspiring to combine it with Muggle history. Well, I plan to add to that later. Wade pushed the part he had completed to her and said, you've read more books than me. Can you help me check if there is anything that needs to be revised in the previous part? Let me see. Hermione did not refuse. After reading it carefully, she said, here, the specific time when the wand was born is unknown. Melina Sims's main contribution is to study the magical properties of 18 kinds of wand wood, and propose the wand adaptation theory and Sims formula. She pulled out a book from her pile of books and flipped it open. In 382 BC, the Ollivander family began to make wands. To this day, the best wand makers are still the Ollivander family. I think this is also a test point. The quill pen quickly recorded on the parchment, and Madame Pants cast a vigilant eye over here from time to time, as if ready to drive a few people out at any time if they made a loud noise. Michael, who was working on his thesis, felt that he was becoming increasingly insignificant. He listened for a while, then silently pulled out a piece of paper and prepared to copy the timeline of the history of magic that Wade had revised. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he nudged Wade with his elbow and whispered, "Look." Theo was standing outside the library door, looking around. He probably just came back from the herbology class, and he was still covered in greenhouse soil, so Madame Pants didn't allow them to come in. Meeting Wade and Michael's gaze, Theo happily waved his hand, motioning them to go out. Wade said goodbye to Hermione, and packed up with Michael to go out. Seeing Ryan and Theo at the door, looking dirty, he asked, "Is there anything urgent?" The two Hufflepuffs looked at each other, and Ryan indicated with his chin, "Go ahead, you asked Professor Sprout." Theo smiled and said, "Wade, didn't you say you wanted to find a quiet place to practice spells this morning? Professor Sprout of the herbology class is the head of our Hufflepuff house. After class, I stayed to help the professor, and after class, I went to ask him courageously." "You asked the professor?" Michael was surprised. "After taking Professor Snape's class, you still dare to ask the professor?" Theo smiled. "Professor Sprout is different, she is very kind. And I think, instead of practicing secretly, it is better to ask the professor for permission first, right? And practicing spells is not a bad thing." "Then what? Professor Sprout provided us with a place?" Wade asked. "Yes." Theo nodded. "An abandoned empty classroom. Professor Sprout said it must meet our requirements." "Then what are you waiting for? Let's go. Let's go and see together." Michael said happily he didn't want to stay in the suffocating library any longer. Wade was about to leave, and suddenly looked back. In the huge library, Hermione was reading alone, looking lonely. Wade remembered that at this time, Hermione seemed to have no friends. "Wait a moment," he said to the others, "I'll call someone else." The book on the table was tapped twice. Hermione looked up and saw Wade smiling at her. "Hermione, we are going to practice spells together. Do you want to join us?" Hogwarts is the earliest established magic school. A long time ago, almost all underage wizards in Europe studied at Hogwarts. But later, other magic schools were established one after another, and many wizards chose to move to the United States to live, and their children studied at Ilvermorny School. While climbing the stairs, Theo panted and said, "So, Hogwarts can normally accommodate 1,000 or 2,000 students and hundreds of professors. But now there are only 200 or 300 people, and many classrooms are idle. For the safety of students, the school has hidden most of the abandoned empty classrooms. Professor Sprout told us that it is an unused spells classroom, and the space should be large." Ryan added, "Behind the portrait of Miss Claudia holding an umbrella on the 3rd floor." The few people searched along the corridor for a while and finally found the portrait in the corridor near the West Tower. The wind blew gently on the grassland full of flowers. A blonde girl held an umbrella with white background and pink flowers, looking into the distance with melancholy eyes, and turned sideways to face the crowd. Ryan took the magic wand and knocked 3 times on the left side of the portrait, saying the password, "Sunshine, Golden Daisy." The girl walked aside with her skirt, the portrait opened, and several people walked in one after another. After the portrait closed, the blonde girl changed the direction of the umbrella, and the rain began to fall in the portrait. "This classroom has been idle for an unknown period of time. There is a thick layer of dust on the ground, some tables and chairs are placed in a mess, and there are a few old books and discarded parchments scattered on the ground. There is a row of wooden shelves on the 1st floor of the classroom against the wall, which are also empty and even broken in several places. In the corner, there are piles of targets for practicing spells, most of which are also broken. Well, it looks like we need to clean up before we practice." Hermione rolled up her sleeves. "Who's going to get a basin of water?" "Me." Theo raised his hand. "I'll go find some cleaning tools first." "Why don't you ask the school's house elves to help clean up?" Michael said lazily. "You know that Hogwarts has a group of house elves, right?" Ryan had already leaned over to pick up a fallen chair. "Wait a minute, everyone." Wade stopped Theo, who was about to leave, and asked others, "We are here to practice spells, why don't we start by cleaning up this classroom?" "What, don't you?" Michael looked at him in disbelief. "Clean it up and repair it as before, start with these 2 spells." Wade looked at Ryan and said, moving tables, chairs and benches can only be done with the levitation spell. Okay, it's a big project, but it sounds fun, Theo said with a smile. Ryan thought for a moment, put the chair he had just lifted back down, and waved his wand, clean it up. The table became a little cleaner, but there was still obvious dirt in the gaps. Ved blinked. Ryan, say it again, Vader said. So Ryan used the cleaning spell again, but the effect was not very obvious. This time, Vader was sure that he saw it very clearly. When Ryan waved his wand, he vaguely saw another arc, the two superimposed together, similar but different, making him clearly realize why Ryan's spell did not work as it should. Just like when playing games, the plugin calculated the best route and attack angle for him. Ryan, when you cast a spell, do this. Raise your wand a little higher and finish it more cleanly. Wade demonstrated. At the same time, Scourgify GI should be pronounced more lightly. Do it again and try it. Ryan paused, perhaps because Hufflepuffs naturally trust Ravenclaw's mind more. He did not make any suggestions, but waved his wand according to Wade's modified version, clean it up. The table suddenly became shiny, as if even flies could not stand on it, and even the floor below became clean. Ryan's eyes widened, looking at his wand, then at Wade, and muttered, "How did you do it?" Others had almost the same reaction, and they all gathered around to look at the table. Theo even bent down and touched it again and again with his hands, exclaiming, "Ryan, I didn't know. You are a spell genius." "No, it's not because of me," Ryan said a little dazedly. He waved his wand again, but because he was too upset, it was not as effective as the last time. Wade didn't say anything. He also used a spell himself, but he didn't find the extra arc, just like his eyes could only see the names above other people's heads, but not his own name. But the experience of guiding Ryan made him know clearly what was right, so his spell was also perfect, and the cleaning range was even larger. Wade thought about it and asked the others to use the cleaning spell. As expected, the thin golden arc was seen again. Even Hermione's spell was not perfect, but it was closer to the standard than others. He instructed them one by one, so that the spells of several people were close to perfection. In the process, his own understanding gradually deepened. Later, he could use the perfect cleaning spell with a casual wave of the wand, even without reciting the spell. If the Golden Finger had a name, Wade felt that he might have a good teacher system. Just by glancing at the top of the student's head, he would know what name to call. Even if a group of people cast spells at the same time, he would know who was doing it seriously and who was just perfunctory. In one-on-one guidance, he could make targeted fine-tuning so that students could master a spell in the shortest time. Unfortunately, the Golden Finger was a silent one, and Wade didn't know if it had any undiscovered functions waiting to be developed, so he could only explore slowly. Vader thought that with the right guidance, most of the spells would be easy for them to master, but this was not the case. The level of magic ultimately depends on one's talent. Simple spells, such as cleaning spells and repairing spells, can't be seen to make any difference when several people cast them. But after the difficulty of the spell increased, Theo seemed to have a bit of difficulty. After learning the levitation spell more than a dozen times, it was still specious. Ryan and Michael were better, but they also worked sometimes. Hermione still succeeded once, but it is difficult to levitate heavy objects. But for students just starting out at magic school, successfully mastering even a simple spell is exciting. When several people walked to the auditorium at dinner time, Michael was still showing off to Theo. "Did you see my last repair spell? It was perfect. The chandelier on the ceiling was restored to its original state immediately. I dare say, it was just hung on it's not that bright at all." Ryan was still waving his wand murmuringly, practicing spells silently, but accidentally, sparks erupted from the tip of the wand, almost setting Hermione's hair on fire. "Oh, please, don't point your wand at people," Hermione said immediately, then asked enthusiastically, "What are you practicing?" Her face seemed to say, "Come and ask me." "Levitation spell," Ryan said. He had a good temper and could understand the little girl's eagerness to help despite her seemingly domineering attitude, so his attitude was very calm from beginning to end. Hermione said in surprise, "But you succeeded just now." Ryan shook his head. "I always feel like my spell is missing something." When the auditorium arrived, the sumptuous dinner exuded the tempting aroma, and several people seemed to realize that they were already hungry. Theo muttered, "Merlin, I think I could eat a cow right now. The sense of accomplishment in learning a spell is great, but the hard work is too hard. After dinner, Michael finally couldn't wait to leave the study group and made an appointment with Terry, who shared a dormitory with him, to play Rolling Stones in the courtyard. Hermione and the others went back to the lounge to do their homework, while Wade took advantage of the library not closing and took the time to borrow 2 books he had read at noon. They had cleaned the practice room in the afternoon, repaired the tables and chairs and placed them against the wall. The empty cabinet next to them was used as a bookshelf. Vader turned on the light and put away his ink and quill. The sounds of cheers and laughter from the little wizards could be heard outside the window, while Wade opened the book and was immersed in reading. Magical theory, tampering with the deepest secrets at will, the source of life, the essence of self, must be prepared to bear the most extreme and dangerous consequences. Analysis of the operating principles of basic spells, magic is the embodiment of the wizard's will. Whether it is to show off among their friends or to gain powerful power, young wizards are often more attracted to cool and magical spells and are willing to spend a lot of time practicing advanced spells. Difficult to pronounce, and boring theories are dismissed. Even though magic theory is a first-grade textbook, the little wizards would rather learn 2 curses like hot on fire than read such boring books. But Wade is different, perhaps because when he was in school in his previous life, his teacher repeatedly emphasized that understanding the essence, understanding the principles, and mastering the rules can help him escape from the ever-changing question types, get rid of the rote learning method, and do not need to answer a lot of questions. You can also get high scores and successfully solve new types of questions. This is what is called efficient learning. That is to say, to know what it is, but also to know why it is so. This kind of study habit made Wade a god of study. In the eyes of his teachers and classmates in his previous life, he went to bed early and got up early every day, and he still had time to play ball and play games. His grades were also among the best among many students who had headaches and thorns. Vader also maintained the same habit in this life. He believed that whether it was science or magic, or whether he had a golden finger or not, a solid foundation would definitely be of great and significant help to his learning. Defense against the dark arts was worse than expected. Vader had originally heard that Professor Quirrell was an extremely intelligent Ravenclaw who taught Muggle studies at Hogwarts a year ago. He is young, handsome, knowledgeable and very popular among the students. Vader thought that even though he had Voldemort hanging on the back of his head, his knowledge had not disappeared, and there should always be something useful in his classes. But the fact is that Quirrell lectured according to the script, and his words were confusing and his voice was unclear. It was hard to hear clearly when he was far away, but when he was close, the smell of garlic in his body caused pain to the Slytherins nearby. Mask. Putting himself in his shoes, Vader could understand his state. Anyone with an extremely evil soul parasitizing on his head would have no intention of preparing lessons. But understanding does not mean acceptance. During the second defense against the dark arts class, Vader sat at the far end and read a book for self-study. Transfiguration is the most complex and dangerous spell we have in the Hogwarts curriculum. Anyone who behaves mischievously in my class will be kicked out and will never be allowed in again. Professor McGonagall said sternly during Transfiguration class. With a wave of her wand, she transformed the desk into a pig and back again, and the students' eyes lit up. Transfiguration is the most elegant magic, but to learn Transfiguration, you first need to understand Gamp's law of Transfiguration. Write it down, students. Don't be stupid. Before using the Transfiguration spell, you must first clearly picture in your mind what you want the object to look like. No distracting thoughts. Chaotic thinking will definitely lead to failure, and there are countless examples of this in history. It is very important to wave the wand firmly and decisively. When you first start learning, you must recite the spell clearly, but skilled wizards can complete the transformation without saying the spell. Incomplete transformation is both irresponsible and dangerous, especially in biological transformation. This involves the 3 theories of the law of transformation. If the transformation fails, it may cause extremely serious consequences. For example, a few years ago there was a French wizard. So when the transformation fails, it should be stopped immediately and restored to its original state. The spell is Restore Original Form. Practice it with me now. Wade wrote at least 13 inches of notes on parchment and practiced restore original form several times before Professor McGonagall asked them to really start practicing Transfiguration. She gave each person a match and asked them to turn it into a needle. Some students recited the spell loudly and poked the match, but there was no change. Wade did not act immediately. A sentence he read in a book yesterday flashed through his mind: magic is the embodiment of the wizard's will. Magic is a kind of power that can make all wishes come true, and Transfiguration is the most typical embodiment. Many students seemed to think that the transformation was unsuccessful because their spells were not recited clearly and accurately enough, or their wand movements were not decisive enough, so they tried in various ways. But when Professor McGonagall turned the table into a pig just now, there was no special movement or spell at all. Just a tap of the wand and the table deformed. Vader raised his wand and pointed it at the match. In mind, clear images, unbreakable faith, and unwavering confidence. If the concept of needle is vague in your mind, or you are thinking, this is really difficult, can magic do it? I can't do it, I will definitely fail at the beginning. With such thoughts, it will be difficult for the spell to succeed. The wand is like a guide for the magic power in the wizard's body, making the magic power more compliant and peaceful, while incantations, gestures or magic rituals are more like means to strengthen beliefs and the wizard's self-hypnosis. A skilled wizard can make the world change according to his will without any extraneous things. Very good, Miss Granger. Professor McGonagall suddenly praised. It's an obvious change, one more point for Gryffindor. The surrounding students couldn't help but stretch their heads to take a look, and saw that the match in front of Hermione not only became very pointed at one end, but also was a little closer to silvery white in color, making it look a bit like a needle. The brown-haired girl tried hard not to show her excitement, her eyes sparkling. Professor McGonagall said, Miss Granger, maybe you would like to demonstrate the process of transformation with everyone again. In view of. Before Professor McGonagall finished speaking, she heard a burst of exclamation from the students on the other side. Wade's match suddenly became slender and sharp, with thin holes at the end, and the surface shone with a metallic luster. Professor McGonagall walked over quickly, used her wand to levitate the needle and inspected it carefully, with a happy and satisfied smile on her face. Perfect transformation, plus 3 points for Ravenclaw. She restored the needle to its original shape and asked the little wizards to gather around to watch Vader's demonstration. In the midst of everyone's gaze, Vader muttered a spell in a low voice and tapped his wand lightly. The match quickly stretched and changed color, and in an instant, a slender silver needle appeared on the table. Everyone exclaimed, "Wow," in unison. Wade raised his eyes, glanced at Hermione who had a somewhat unwilling look on her face, and then met a pair of green eyes. The boy with messy black hair smiled friendly, with surprise and admiration in his eyes, while the red-haired boy with freckles next to him had a silly expression. They say Ravenclaw is the smartest. After class, Vader heard the red-haired Ron say to Harry, I understand a little better now. After Transfiguration class, there is Charms class, with only 10 minutes to change classrooms. After Professor McGonagall finished assigning the homework, a group of people all headed towards the Charms classroom with a huff of cheers. The Charms class was still divided between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. Hermione ignored the difference between the colleges and sat directly next to Vader and asked, Do you have any other plans after class? Wade said, Get ready to go to the practice room. Okay. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief and said, I also plan to go over there and continue to practice Transfiguration. How did you succeed in it? Do you have any tips? As for the trick, you have to believe that you can definitely do it. This is the most important thing. Before Vader could finish his words, Professor Flitwick walked in. Phileas Flitwick, Professor of Charms, is the headmaster of Ravenclaw House. He is only 1 meter tall and about the size of a 3 or 4-year-old child, but he has long white hair and a fluffy white beard. In order to teach the students who were taller than him when they sat down, Professor Flitwick had a thick pile of books placed on his desk, forming the shape of steps, and he climbed to the top of the steps. Some of the students couldn't help but chuckle. Okay, children. Professor Flitwick held the short wand in his small hand. Maybe some of you are thinking, why do we need this little teacher to teach us? Many students laughed at the professor's self-deprecating words. It seemed that the professor didn't mind someone joking with him. In other words, what can he teach me? Professor Flitwick said, waving his wand, and a flock of birds flew out from the tip of his wand and flew around the heads of the students. He clicked with the wand again, and the 2 books grew slender arms and legs like bamboo branches, floating in the air and dancing. The students applauded one after another, convinced. Although it only lasted 2 minutes, they had already fallen in love with this short professor. He was not as timid as Quirrell, nor as boring as Professor Binns, nor like Professor McGonagall or Professor Snape. It's so severe that it's scary. Ravenclaws can't help but think proudly, our head of house must be the best professor in Hogwarts. Thank you for your applause. Professor Flitwick said softly. I think charms is the most interesting course. A wizard who can't do charms cannot be called a wizard. Of course, before going to class, I first want to name my lovely students and get to know them. Professor Flitwick called the names from the roster, and things started going smoothly until Harry Potter. Before waiting for an answer, the professor screamed and fell from the pile of books with a thud. The students were stunned and looked at each other. Many of them looked at the black-haired boy. Harry Potter raised his right hand awkwardly and said hesitantly to the empty pile of books, I'm here, Professor. There was another small scream from behind the pile of books. After a long time, Professor Flitwick with a messy beard crawled out from inside, muttering, Oh, of course you were in my classroom too, of course, I should have known it long ago. The elderly professor touched his beard, gave himself a clean up, looked at Harry Potter excitedly, and said, Nice to see you, kid. Harry nodded and smiled shyly. Wade didn't know if Professor Flitwick saw someone's shadow in Harry Potter. He was silent for a moment before continuing to call the roll. The first spell class, of course, also started with theory. We only learned the simplest spell, Lumos. This kind of spell can be learned by practicing it twice at home before school starts. Therefore, by the end of the get out of class, everyone has successfully mastered it. Professor Flitwick generously gave both colleges similar marks. He didn't leave much homework, only 3 inches, which was basically a review of the key points covered in class. If Wade was a little lazy and handed in his notes in class, it would probably be about the same. After the freshmen gradually became familiar with the ever-changing stairs in the castle, Wade's life in Hogwarts also formed a certain routine. The schedule for first-year freshmen is very easy. There is only 1 class a day at the least, and no more than 3 classes at most. The rest of the time is at the student's disposal. After seeing such a class schedule, Wade was very skeptical for a while. Why can't those students who complain about the professor's too much homework on time complete a few inches of paper? In his previous life, when Wade was less than 10 years old, he had to write at least 300 words, and that was in Chinese, which is called a language compression package. If converted to English, he could easily expand it to 1,000 words. After systematic training in high school, college, and graduate school, it is not impossible for him to write 10,000 words in 2 days. After studying with Michael, Hermione and others for a period of time, Wade understood the reason. Among the first-year students, except for Wade, Hermione was the easiest to complete the paper. At the very least, she would not make mistakes in basic grammar, and rarely encountered words that she could not spell. She could quickly grasp the key points in the text and then retell them clearly. The above points were difficult for the other 3 to do, even Michael from Ravenclaw. Because they all came from wizard families. The lives of wizards and ordinary people are almost completely isolated, even if one of the couples is a muggle. Most wizard families live in isolation. Not only do they never take the initiative to contact muggles, they will also set up muggle-repelling spells near their homes to prevent muggles from accidentally breaking into their lives. Therefore, wizards do not understand how muggles dress, do not understand the development of muggle technology, and will not send their underage children to muggle schools to study. In their eyes, this is no different from humans sending their children to monkeys living in trees to teach. There is only one magic school in the UK, Hogwarts, and there is no magic elementary school or magic university. In the wizarding world, children under the age of 11 are basically educated at home. If parents have time, they will teach their children to read, write, and do simple arithmetic. If they encounter irresponsible parents, their children may not even know how to spell with a quill pen. Michael and his friends have basically been educated by their parents since they were 5 or 6 years old. At least they don't have much problem with reading and writing. However, being able to read and write is different from learning ability. Compared with the systematic education in Muggle schools, the family education of wizards lacks a lot of things. For example, when wizard parents teach their children to read, they don't actually cultivate the ability of logical reasoning and induction and summary. Wade suspects that many wizards may not have any concept in this regard at all. After all, they have always been dismissive of Muggle theories. And the little wizards, including Hermione, basically lack the ability to quickly extract the key points from the article and understand it. For example, the young wizards can only understand the temperature of objects A and B is equal, and the temperature of B and C is equal, so the temperature of A and C is also equal. But their reference books say, if each of the two thermodynamic systems is in thermal equilibrium with the third thermodynamic system, then they must also be in thermal equilibrium with each other. That is, if it can be confirmed that the physical properties of the two systems will not change when heat can be exchanged, even if the two systems are not allowed to exchange heat, it can be confirmed that they are in a state of mutual equilibrium. Young wizards. A string of letters slid smoothly through the brain without leaving a trace. Hermione can memorize all the content with her powerful memory, and then slowly understand it by comparing different materials, but most young wizards can only write down a bunch of notes that they can't understand, scratch their heads and hand in a homework, hoping that the professor will be kind enough to give them an A pass. Moreover, the 11-year-old child was away from his parents to study in a boarding school, and the discipline of the college professors was not strict. Even Professor McGonagall or Professor Snape, who were known for their strictness, would not care whether the little wizards who had no classes slept in the dormitory or played games in the lounge. This relaxed environment is naturally a great test for the self-control of minors. Laziness and playing are human nature, but learning is not. Learning is only interesting to a very small number of people. For example, Hermione. For example, Wade. In just half a month, the two stood out from the first-year freshmen. The difference is that Hermione is strict with herself and others, and she firmly refuses any copying of homework in violation of school rules, while Wade never minds others copying his homework. When he is studying hard in the practice room and practicing spells repeatedly, he never forces others to work hard with him. Wade actually understands the laziness of teenagers in learning. He was like this in his previous life. In this life, he worked harder than others, not because he loved studying, but because he loved magic, because for him, magic was not an innate and natural ability, so he cherished this opportunity more than anyone else in the school. Once again, practice was close to curfew time, and Wade hurried back to Ravenclaw Tower. At this time, the corridor outside was quiet, as if everyone was asleep. But as soon as he entered the lounge, he felt that it was too early. Hogwarts has a curfew but no lights out time, and students can stay in the brightly lit common room all night if they choose. At this time, there were many students of all grades in the Ravenclaw lounge. There were lovers in love sitting on the sofa in the corner talking sweetly, there were bored little wizards playing wizard chess on the round tea table, and there were also senior students. Students in the first grade are rushing to catch up on their homework. Although there were many people, it didn't seem noisy. The Ravenclaws consciously lowered their voices when talking. 7 or 8 people gathered on the sofa in front of the fireplace, and girls giggled from time to time. Wade glanced over there and casually found a remote corner to sit down, reading and taking notes. When Michael in the crowd saw this, he smiled and said something to the girl next to him, then walked to sit next to Wade. Learning so late again. Michael leaned on the table and said, "Vede, we have been in school for less than a month, and you have almost finished learning all the content in the first grade. What are you doing with the rest of the time? I didn't say that. You are working too hard, you should relax sometimes." "Wade, brother, do you know how many girls want to know you?" He raised his eyebrows towards the fireplace, causing another chuckle among the girls. Vader stopped his quill, looked at Michael quietly with his gray eyes, and asked, "I don't know." "But Michael, do you know how long we can stay at Hogwarts?" "What?" Michael looked confused. The school system of Hogwarts is 7 years, but if you don't pass any of the ordinary wizarding level examinations, also known as OWL, you have to leave school after graduating from the 5th year. Michael didn't understand why Wade asked such a question that everyone knew. 7 years, Wade said with some sadness. There are only 52 weeks in a year. Excluding summer vacation and Christmas vacation, we can only stay in school for a total of about 38 weeks a year, and 7 years is only 266 weeks. Ah, Michael thought for a while. That's right, so what? So, even if I can finish a book in a week, there are only 266 books in 7 years. But how many books are there in the Hogwarts library? Thousands. It's like a vault full of treasures, open for you to take at will, but you come in and take a small bag of gold galleons out. Don't you think it's a pity? Michael felt that what he said made sense, and he suddenly had a sense of urgency in his heart that time is running out. And think about it, Wade continued, only in these 7 years. No, in 266 weeks, we can ask questions to the greatest wizards of the time at any time in the safest place in the world. The one who teaches us Transfiguration is Professor McGonagall, one of the only 7 animagus since the 20th century. The one who teaches us spells is Professor Flitwick, the champion of the dueling competition, and the one who teaches us potions is Professor Snape, the master of potions. Although the professor of defense against the dark arts is a little bit worse, where else can you find such a good learning environment after leaving Hogwarts? After graduation, when you encounter problems with advanced magic or potions, who can guide you so selflessly and teach you how to do it? When you want to learn powerful spells in the future but can't find a way, won't it be too late to miss the library of Hogwarts? Not only Michael, but the students around him who had become quiet at some point couldn't help but nodded. So Michael, Wade asked in a deep voice, do you still think that it is enough for us to study only 8 books in 1/7 of the time? Michael, who had been completely convinced by Wade's theory, shook his head vigorously. He wanted to say something but didn't say it. But when he thought of the 2 weeks he had wasted, he couldn't help feeling a little anxious. He stopped chatting with the girls and took out the Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration that he had thrown into the corner and started studying. For a while, the Ravenclaw common room became quiet, with only the sound of pages turning and quills writing. The 2 fifth-year students who hurried back at curfew thought that Professor Snape had invaded the Ravenclaw common room. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly and tiptoed back to the dormitory. Dinner time, in the hall. Something is wrong, Fred. Yes, it's really wrong, George. The red-haired twins looked at each other, and they reached out their hands at the same time, randomly grabbed a student from Ravenclaw College, and pressed him to his own desk before he could scream. What do you two want to do, Weasley? The Ravenclaw boy who was held down by them said unhappily, I don't have time to participate in your pranks. Huh, what? Ron, who was chewing a chicken leg, looked up in confusion. It's none of your business, little Ronnie. Fred pushed his brother's head back, and the twins put their arms around the necks of the Ravenclaw boys on the left and right, and asked, Davis, what's going on with you Ravenclaws recently? Holding books while eating. Holding books while walking. There are not many Ravenclaws in the courtyard during lunch break. Even Quidditch training is not as active as before. I didn't even go on a date on weekends. You didn't like reading so much before. Seriously, did Snape secretly drug you? For example, a love potion called Love of Learning, or something. Associating Professor Snape's face with a love potion that exudes a pink smell, Roger Davis couldn't help but tremble. Don't talk nonsense, Professor Snape will not give a love potion. No, I mean there is no such love potion. No, we just suddenly realized life is short, and the time we can use to study is even shorter. Huh, the 2 Weasleys looked at him inexplicably. Roger Davis took a deep breath and looked at the twins solemnly. Fred, George, do you know how long we can stay in Hogwarts? Fred silently reached out to feel the temperature of his forehead. My brain is not burned. Davis slapped his hand down and said seriously, such as 266 weeks, tens of thousands of books, not studying hard is like going into a treasure mountain but returning empty-handed, and other theories. After that, Davis went to the Ravenclaw long table to have dinner with a book in his arms. The Weasley brothers looked at each other, and even Harry and Ron, who were originally concentrating on eating, stopped unconsciously. The atmosphere of hard study began to spread quietly in Hogwarts. Of course, most people are only enthusiastic for a short time. For example, Ron, he only worked hard to compile the paper on the history of magic and then started to play with his moving wizard chess. For example, the twins, they still spend most of their time on pranks and studying magic tricks. But there are also some people who are secretly motivated to start working hard. Michael is a person who works hard intermittently. He is smart but not hardworking. Sometimes he will be influenced by Wade and work hard for a while, but soon he will be attracted by something more interesting, such as using magic to manipulate small paper figures to fight, or discussing music or clothes with beautiful girls. In the practice room, most of the time it is Wade, Hermione, Theo and Ryan. Sometimes Professor Sprout of the herbology class will come to take a look, probably worried that they are doing some dangerous practice here. After seeing the layout of the practice room and the learning results of several people, he praised them highly, added 5 points to each college, and said that students can ask her questions when she has no classes, and she is happy to answer students' questions. Professor Sprout is really a very gentle and amiable witch. She almost never treats students differently because of the difference between colleges, and only prefers those students who are particularly talented in herbology. Not long after, Professor Sprout recommended a Gryffindor student to their study group, Neville Longbottom. The round-faced boy was honest and simple. He was very clumsy in learning and learned spells slower than anyone else, but he worked very hard and didn't cause trouble. He quickly integrated into their small group. On a weekend night, a notice posted on the bulletin board in the lounge caused all the first-year students to get restless. Starting next week, they would have flying lessons. Flying has always been mankind's biggest dream, and Vader is no exception. In his opinion, one of the greatest benefits of learning magic is that you can fly freely in the sky. Of course, you can also fly into the sky by airplane, and it is more comfortable than riding a broom or flying horse. But there's no doubt about it, the latter is much cooler. Ravenclaw's flying lessons are with Hufflepuff on Friday afternoons. Before that, Thursday afternoon was Gryffindor and Slytherin flying lessons. Starting Monday, all the freshmen were talking about flying, and Michael was no different. You know, my most thrilling experience was riding a broomstick and racing down a cliff with an eagle. Michael boasted with a sausage stuck on his fork. We started from 1,300 meters away. It swooped down from high altitude and finally hovered only 15 centimeters above the ground. The grass on the ground could touch the tip of my nose. Isn't that great? Theo at the next table believed it and exclaimed, Michael, you should play Quidditch. You must be good at Wronski's fake moves. Many famous players can't do this. Michael's face turned slightly red, and he forced himself to say, of course. I have to say that after Professor Flitwick sees my wonderful performance in the flying class, he might invite me to join the Quidditch team in advance. Woolen cloth. Definitely, you are simply a genius. Theo praised loudly. Michael blushed even more. At the long table, some senior Ravenclaw girls looked at Michael and chuckled, obviously seeing through his lie. In order to cover up his embarrassment, Michael turned around and said, Veed, do you need me to give you some flying instructions in advance? So that you won't feel nervous when you get on the broom. I'm an expert in this area. I rode it before I could walk. Flying around the house on a broomstick. Really, I think we also need some guidance. Hermione pulled Neville over quickly and sat next to her. She also held a pile of books in her arms. Quidditch Origins, Wigton, The Miracle of the Hobos, He Flies Like a Madman, that sort of thing. You borrowed so many books? Wade asked in surprise. Yeah, but it's not very helpful. Hermione put the book on the table and said anxiously, almost all of these books are about the barbaric sport of Quidditch, and they don't even talk about how to fly more smoothly. The girl's words immediately aroused dissatisfaction among Quidditch fans. Michael raised his eyebrows and said, barbaric. Hermione, you probably don't understand yet. Quidditch is the most popular and exciting sport. Everyone loves Quidditch. It has nothing to do with savagery. No, I should say, you don't understand its wild charm at all. Really? Hermione asked unceremoniously, but it makes Snidget a protected animal. On the verge of extinction. There's nothing wrong with Quidditch. Michael yelled first, then asked strangely. What is the golden snitch? Does it sound a bit like the golden snitch? That is a small bird that flies quickly. Vader happened to have seen this part before. He said, in the past, a golden snidget was released in Quidditch games. When did the team's hunters kill the bird? Die, when will the game end? Therefore, the number of snitches has become extremely rare from being as common as sparrows, and protected areas have to be established to prevent them from being completely extinct. Later, although the golden snitch was invented to replace the role of the snitch, Quidditch in some countries. The team seems to have retained its old customs, so until now, Golden Snidget is still a protected animal. Hermione raised her head and said, yes, so Quidditch is a barbaric sport based on the lives of countless gold snitches. It's a pity that not many people pay attention to the poor gold snitch now, just for the kind of sport that can cause death. Cheer. The girl completely forgot why she was sitting at this table, hugged her book and left angrily, leaving the remaining boys looking at each other. After a while, Neville said timidly, so, flight instructor, is there any more? He said with a frown, I have never flown before, and my grandma won't let me get close to a broomstick, not even a toy broomstick. No. Well, of course, Michael said enthusiastically. It's actually very simple to ride a broom. You just need to hold the stick in front of you with your hands, and then push hard with your feet, and you can fly. The most important thing is to keep your balance and turn. You must be flexible when doing it. The models of various flying broomsticks are very different. It would be good if the public broom provided by the school can have a sweeping 7-star, but the best one at the moment is definitely the Nimbus 2000. Michael's flight instructions were only 2 or 3 sentences long, and he spent the rest of the time talking endlessly about the capabilities of the Nimbus series. Theo was very supportive and believed every word he said. Neville stared at his big round eyes and tried to write down everything he said, but in the end there were only a few lines on the paper. Hold the handle, push hard on the ground, and maintain balance. Ryan secretly told Wade, I'm sure Michael has only ever ridden a toy broomstick before. Why do you say that? Wade asked, have you ever ridden a real one? I have never ridden one by myself because my mother wouldn't let me, saying it was too dangerous. Ryan said, but my dad had a comet, and he once held me and flew several times in the sky. He said that for beginners, it's too dangerous to ride. It's good if you can sit firmly on it, and you can't fly in a hurry, because the flying broomstick is much faster than a toy broomstick, and there is no height limit. He looked at Michael's eloquent appearance and shook his head slightly. There's nothing to worry about. Wade comforted him, the professor is still here. Although he had no memory of the detailed plot of Harry Potter, he remembered Neville's highlight performance in the final battle. What big trouble can happen in an ordinary flying lesson? Speaking of which, in my impression, there does seem to be a plot about flying lessons. Vader rubbed his chin, trying to dig out useful fragments from his memory. It seems that Neville was bullied by Draco. And then Harry Potter stood up for him. That should be the case. On Thursday afternoon, Ravenclaw only had one charms class with Slytherin. After class, the Slytherins happily ran to the lawn. That's where the flying lessons were. The Ravenclaws didn't have any classes after that, so they just went to watch. It was rare for Vader to move with the large group. It was a flying lesson after all. The students gathered in the corridor in 2s and 3s, eavesdropping on the speech of Mrs. Huochi, the flying course professor there, hoping to learn something in advance so as not to be embarrassed in the formal class tomorrow. It didn't take long for them to see Neville. Yes, it was Neville. While everyone else was still standing on the ground, the boy shot straight into the sky like a cannonball. Ah! There were horrified screams in the sky, and then a figure fell straight down. Before anyone else had time to react, he slammed into the grass with a bang. There was silence among the crowd. Is he dead? A girl asked in a low voice in horror. The Ravenclaws who witnessed this scene suddenly had a great fear of flying lessons, especially Michael who had been talking non-stop before. He looked at the figure lying in the grass with a pale face, and his voice was trembling. Is it my fault? Wade patted his shoulder and comforted him. It shouldn't be a big problem. He didn't hit the ground on his head when he fell. Michael's throat rolled and he was speechless. Fortunately, Mrs. Hooch immediately ran over to check and quickly helped Neville up from the grass. Thank God, the boy only had one wrist and looked a little strange. Mrs. Hooch helped him to the infirmary and shouted a warning. Other students are not allowed to move. Vader, Michael pleaded. Let's go see Neville. Wade glanced at the other students standing blankly on the grass, nodded, and the two of them quickly ran through the corridor to the infirmary. Flying lessons, right. Through the door, they heard Madame Pomfrey, the school nurse, say with surprise, at this time every year, there are always some accidents among the first-year students. I can't even think of it. Which year was peaceful? Wade gently opened the door, and Michael squeezed one head in first. Neville was seen crying and sitting on the bed in the infirmary. Madame Pomfrey held his arm and gently shook the wand to check. The top of the wand was scattered with feather-like light. Then this student will be left to you, Mrs. Huochi said eagerly. There are still more than 20 students on the lawn with unattended brooms. Alas, if it weren't for the lack of time, I should really ask Mr. Filch looks at them. Madame Pomfrey said, okay, all. Mrs. Huochi was obviously impatient. She turned around and left in a hurry after hearing, okay. The door suddenly opened and Michael stumbled in. Seeing the two students, Mrs. Huochi's eagle-like eyes immediately stood up, as if she was about to reprimand them. But then she noticed their blue and bronze ties, and her anger died down again. Since they were not students who had sneaked out of her classroom, Mrs. Huochi had no time to care about them and walked away with wind on her feet. Take good care of this child. The rest of Madame Pomfrey's words seemed like she was talking to herself. She gently comforted the crying Neville. Don't worry, it's just a small problem. Let's take a look. It'll be cured. I promise you won't miss tonight's dinner. Madame Pomfrey waved her wand and a potion flew from the shelf. She let Neville drink, then pointed her wand at his arm and whispered a spell. As if in the blink of an eye, the boy's broken wrist was reattached. Judging from his expression, Neville didn't even feel much pain. Vader watched in amazement. What about you, children? Madame Pomfrey turned to look at the two people at the door and asked, are you injured? Are you sick? Or are you hungry? Michael pursed his lips and said nothing. Vader had no choice but to say, Mrs. Pomfrey, let's come see Neville. Oh, come to visit a friend. Madame Pomfrey was a little happy when she heard this and said, Mr. Longbottom just needs to rest for a while. After the bones are fully grown, he can go back with you. Thank you, ma'am, Vader said, and Neville also thanked him. After Madame Pomfrey left, Vader asked, how are you, Neville? Does your wrist still hurt? It doesn't hurt much anymore. Neville shook his head and lifted up his robe. You could see that the wound on his leg was healing quickly. Look, it's almost healed here. Madame Pomfrey's healing skills are really powerful. That's probably what happened with St. Mungo's Street. Mungo's, the largest magic hospital in Britain, the best healers are there. Neville said. Michael walked over slowly and whispered, Neville. The boy looked up at him. Michael lowered his head in shame. I'm sorry, I lied. I have never ridden a broomstick before. The trick I told you was also heard from the radio. I actually have no experience myself. Neville blinked. I know, he said. Huh. Michael's eyes widened in surprise. Neville explained. Hermione said you wouldn't be so excited about flying lessons if you were used to riding a broomstick. Michael's face turned red. Did everyone see his frivolous talk? But Hermione also said. Neville added. What you said is correct, it is also written in the book. But after all, flying is not a skill that can be mastered only by knowing the theory, right? I don't know why, Michael suddenly wanted to cry. Wade looked at this scene with a smile. Originally, when he looked at these classmates, he felt somewhat like taking care of children. But at this moment, Wade felt, maybe they could really become good friends. Although Madame Pomfrey healed Neville's wrist easily, it still took a while to wait for the bone to heal. Because of guilt, Michael was unwilling to leave Neville alone in the infirmary and insisted on waiting until he was fully recovered before going to have dinner together. On the way, the stairs changed direction again, causing several people to walk twice as long as usual before returning to the auditorium. In short, when they returned, the last dessert on the long table also disappeared. Oh, bad, Michael said with a bitter face. I should have some candy in my dormitory. Hi, Michael, Neville, Wade. Theo and Ryan came over. The two of them have been friends since childhood, and they are almost inseparable like conjoined twins after going to school. We heard that Neville had an accident in the flying class. Theo looked at Neville with concern. Are you okay? Broken wrist. Neville raised his arm to show him, but Madame Pomfrey healed it in a moment. Great. Theo grabbed his arm and looked at it, and said happily. Have you had dinner? Ryan asked. We didn't see you just now. No. Michael looked at the two pitifully, and asked expectantly, did you two leave us a piece of bread or something? No, but it's better than that. Theo pulled Michael out of the hall. Come with us. Where are we going? Neville asked confusedly. You'll see it soon. This is a secret that only Hufflepuff students know. A senior student told us the day before yesterday. Theo said excitedly. I dare say that nothing can be hidden from the Weasley twins. Michael said to Wade, and Wade nodded in agreement. They passed through a door and walked down a stone staircase to a wide stone corridor. The torches on the walls on both sides illuminated the corridor. There were many decorative paintings on the walls like other places in the castle, but there were few people in the paintings, all of them were various delicacies. Theo stopped in front of a huge fruit painting, reached out his hand, and gently scratched the pear in the painting. The pear squirmed as if it was ticklish, chuckled, and turned into a green doorknob. Theo grabbed the door handle and pulled it open, and everyone entered one after another. This is a very vast room. The size and layout of the room are the same as the auditorium above. There are also 4 long tables, but there is nothing on the tables. There were many gleaming kitchen utensils beside the surrounding stone walls, and there was a brick fireplace at the other end, with a roaring flame and the smell of barbecue. There are many strange-looking creatures in the room. They have big bat-like ears, round eyes that protrude like frogs, and look as big as tennis balls. They also have slender noses like pencils, and slender limbs. Tea towels with the Hogwarts crest printed on them were worn as robes. When the little monsters heard the noise, they all turned their heads and looked over. They looked at several students with eager and expectant eyes, but did not gather around them. Whichever direction Vader and the others looked, the little monsters would bow to them and curtsy, appearing very respectful. Oh my God! Michael was extremely surprised and said enviously, so many house elves. Welcome to the Hogwarts kitchen, Theo said, opening his arms. This is the best place in Hogwarts. You can tell them what you want to eat. The elves are very enthusiastic. Ryan also said. Hello. Vader bent down and looked at the nearest house elf and asked, can you get us something to eat? Of course, sir. The house elf said softly, I would be honored. The house elves happily brought over various delicacies such as pies, steaks, baked potatoes, egg tarts, and plum pudding, as well as orange juice, pumpkin juice, vegetable juice, and even 2 bottles of butterbeer. After several people had eaten and drank enough, the elves brought many desserts after the meal, vowing to make them satisfied. I can't eat any more, Neville said with difficulty after taking a lick of an ice cream cone. Almost all Hufflepuff students know where the kitchen is because our common room is nearby. So it's an open secret, Theo told Michael. There are always all kinds of good things in our common room. Food, Hufflepuffs never go hungry. It's wonderful, Michael sighed while drinking butterbeer. Why can't I be a Hufflepuff? What are you talking about? Ryan mocked. I heard someone say during the sorting, if he was sorted into Hufflepuff, he would rather drop out of school. There's nothing good about Ravenclaw. Michael sighed. Ravenclaw Tower is too high, really too high. I climb the stairs every day and want to die. Every time I go back to rest after class everyone must make a big decision. He seemed to have had a little too much to drink, and he spoke very aggrievedly. Vader managed to control himself from filling his stomach, but it was obvious that he was not very drunk as he was drinking for the first time. He was knocked down with just 2 rum-filled chocolates and a glass of butterbeer. At this moment, Wade's head was dizzy, and he looked at people with double visions. He propped his chin up, yawned lazily, and was identifying the house elves one by one. Coco, Amy, Becky, Happy, Lola, Phil. Being read out by the wizard seemed to be a great honor for the elves. They lined up to tell Vader their names, as if they were performing some ritual. Zoe, are you a girl? Wade recognized the elf who first talked to him. To be honest, the elves all have wrinkled faces like 80-year-olds. Apart from their names, their appearance and clothing are indistinguishable from each other by gender. Why yes, Mr. Gray, Zoe said, wringing her fingers nervously and excitedly. Are you the ones who usually help us clean the room and do the laundry? Wade asked. Yes, sir. Zoe nodded vigorously, looking at Vader seriously with her big eyes. The people in charge of Ravenclaw Tower are Zoe, Happy and Phil. If you look closely, you can see that the house elf's tea towel is decorated with a tiny flower. She is indeed a girl. Are you guys cleaning other parts of the castle as well? Wade asked again. Yes, sir. Were you the ones who took our luggage off the train? Yes, sir. Thank you. Wade sighed and said, it's really a lot of work. No, how could it be? Zoe said quickly. We like to work. Work does not make us feel hard. It is really terrible not to have work. The house elves all expressed how dedicated they were to their work and how they never slacked off. They try their best to make dinner that satisfies everyone, polish every piece of silverware until it shines, wash the students' muddy shoes, and they always appear and disappear quietly. He never disturbs others and is a very good house elf. Wade looked at them silently and didn't speak for a long time. After dinner, it was almost the curfew time. The elves enthusiastically stuffed several people with cream cakes and fried jam donuts, and then they returned to the college lounge. Vader and Michael walked up the movable stairs. When they were tired and panting, the armor on the wall suddenly shook, and then a white guy suddenly jumped out, and at the same time let out a roar like a wild beast. Yell. Ah! Michael was startled, his feet went weak and he sat on the ground. Ha ha ha! The white guy held his belly and laughed loudly. He floated in the air and kicked his feet wildly. Michael was angry and funny. Peeves. You are hiding here again to scare people. Peeves is a special ghost in Hogwarts. He can float around, possess entities, touch objects, and loves to cause chaos. As his name suggests, he is a very naughty and mischievous guy. Look, there are two little wizards here. They stay up at night and wander around outside. In the corridor, Peeves circled around Vader and the two of them and said maliciously, wait a minute, I want to call Fairy come here chi. Catch you little rascals. Peeves likes to scare students who go out at night like this, and then chase them all the way to watch them run back to the dormitory in panic. Sometimes he will tease them by pulling their robes and hair. But this time he miscalculated, because with a wave of Vader's wand, a row of golden characters appeared in front of him, writing the current time. Ha! Michael gasped and laughed. There are still 7 minutes until curfew. You can't fool us, Peeves. Peeves rolled his round eyes and said slyly, 7 minutes, it's not enough for you to return to Ravenclaw Tower. Yes, but by the time you recruit Filch, we will definitely have gone back. Wade said comfortably. Peeves curled his lips and muttered, humph, boring Ravenclaw. He turned around and floated away to find other students to play pranks on. Michael breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, I wasn't pestered by Peeves. It would be terrible if he really called Filch. It is unlikely that Peeves will go to Filch. Vader pulled him up from the ground and said, have you forgotten? The two of them hate each other, and Peeves will not be willing to do it to make Filch happy. Quote. That's right, Michael nodded. Peeves often wreaks havoc, either knocking down statues or spilling ink everywhere, which adds a lot of workload to Filch, the administrator of the castle, and drives Filch crazy. The two of them walked up the steps of the Ravenclaw Tower, which made them dizzy. After walking for a while, they had to stop and rest. Their thighs were so sore that they felt as if they were not their own. Usually at this time, Michael would complain endlessly. Unless there was a beautiful girl next to him, he would pretend not to be reluctant at all and stop to rest in the name of taking care of the girl. But today, Michael was very silent. It wasn't until the two of them were about to return to the lounge that he said, we will also have flying lessons tomorrow. Wade. Yeah, forget the nonsense I said. Michael said sullenly. Follow Mrs. Hooch's instructions and take your time. Vader said helplessly. What happened to Neville was just an accident. Not everyone is as unlucky as him. Michael may not know this in his heart, but he can't let go of the burden in his heart for a while. After finally returning to the tower, it was already past the curfew time, but there were still a few students gathered in the corridor. Not every Ravenclaw is good at solving puzzles, which involve blind spots in knowledge, and even the smartest brains can't do anything about it. So sometimes you can see more than 20 students standing outside the common room, discussing and answering the questions of the day. Wade walked over and knocked on the bronze door knocker on the wooden board. The eagle's beak on the door knocker suddenly opened, and said in a voice as gentle as a chant, there are hands above and below, sometimes crawling and sometimes walking. When walking, they look like people, and when they crawl, they look like dogs. The questions posed by the eagle-shaped door knocker must be answered correctly for the lounge door to open. Michael imagined some kind of dark crawling creature covered with hands, and said with a horrified look, what kind of monster is this? Is it a demon from some mythology? He hurriedly found his textbook, Monsters and Their Origins, from his bag and flipped through it without hesitation. Don't read it, it's not in the book. A Ravenclaw student said tiredly, I've already read through the entire book. Several others nodded silently. Vader stood thinking. The bronze door knocker is like the legendary Sphinx. The questions it asks may not be difficult, but sometimes they are not easy to think of, because the door knocker always only asks questions, but does not tell them whether it is a brain teaser or a riddle. It will not prompt that the answer is a plant, animal, utensil, word, or intangible thing, such as time, death, etc. This riddle sounds very Cthulhu-like at first glance, but it also feels a little familiar. Monkey. After a moment, Wade asked uncertainly. Correct answer. The eagle-shaped door knocker said, opening the wooden door. After an accident during a flying lesson, the breakfast table was much quieter the next day. Students no longer tirelessly tell stories about how they once flew across mountains and seas on broomsticks. Instead, another piece of news spreads among the first-year students. Didn't Harry Potter and Slytherin Malfoy almost get into a fight yesterday during the flying class? Guess what happened? Padma Patil spoke in a mysterious tone on the long table. People around said, I heard that because Harry Potter showed amazing flying talent, not only was he not punished, but he was recommended by Professor McGonagall to join the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Since she had a twin sister in Gryffindor House, she was always well informed. Really? That Professor McGonagall? The students around were surprised. Who doesn't know that Professor McGonagall is the most impartial and strict professor at Hogwarts? She treats the 4 colleges equally and never shows any favoritism. This time she made an exception for Harry Potter. This shock even made people forget the previous news for a moment. But eventually someone remembered it. This is impossible, Terry said firmly. No first-year freshman has been able to join the Quidditch team in a century. This must be a rumor. Maybe he is a reserve player or something. Anthony guessed. After all, we have all seen that Potter flies very well, fast and dexterous. If the Gryffindor team shuts him out, then it's unbelievable. But after all, he is a freshman, has never ridden a broom before, and doesn't even know the rules of Quidditch. It's still ridiculous to join the team directly, he should only be a reserve member. Another student, Kevin, also said, think about it, if Potter really made an exception and joined the team, the Weasley brothers would have already shouted out. But have you heard their movements? The analysis was sound and well-founded, and everyone nodded in agreement. Padma curled her lips disdainfully and whispered to Michael. Actually, Gryffindor captain Wood wanted to use Harry Potter as a secret weapon, so he didn't let it be publicized. Those stupid boys were just jealous, so I just don't want to admit it. Michael didn't remind her that he was also one of the boys, but smiled and said, maybe they just don't want to admit that they are not as good as another boy in front of a beautiful girl. Padma blushed slightly. Wade looked sideways and saw Michael raised one eyebrow at him. He looked so romantic and wanton at such a young age, as if he had walked out of the shadow before. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the restaurant. 6 long-eared owls carrying a long and thin package flew into the hall with difficulty, attracting everyone's attention. The owls circled down, threw the package in front of Harry Potter, and then flapped their wings and flew away, leaving only a few feathers. Michael gasped, grabbed Wade's wrist, and said in a low voice, broom. I bet it's definitely a flying broom. He was so envious that his eyes turned red, and he said in a voice that sounded like vomiting blood, and it's a Nimbus series, I recognize that packaging. Yeah, Wade pried his fingers apart, put his hand back on the table, and said nonchalantly, if you perform well in the afternoon flying class, you may have the opportunity to join the team and get a new broom. He just said it casually, but Michael seemed to take it seriously. His eyes became particularly serious, and his teeth were particularly strong when he bit down the lamb chops. Soon, it was time for the flying class. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students walked to the lawn where flying lessons were held. Standing here, you can see Hagrid's hut and the Forbidden Forest in the distance. Sometimes you can hear strange sounds coming from there was a sound over there. Unlike Gryffindor, who loves adventure, and Slytherin, who likes to stir up trouble, Ravenclaw knows how to protect himself wisely, and usually only explores within the rules. Hufflepuff students are all well behaved, and more they will not actively violate the rules. Most students in these 2 colleges will not take a step into the Forbidden Forest until they graduate from 7th grade. About 20 broomsticks were neatly arranged on the ground, and Mrs. Hooch was already waiting there in advance. She stared at the students with alert and scrutinizing eyes like a hawk, and said sharply, "I guess you have heard about yesterday's accident. Fortunately, Mr. Longbottom of Gryffindor only broke his wrist, but if you are reckless it won't be surprising if someone breaks his neck." The little eagle and the little badger nodded in agreement. Okay, now everyone stands next to a broomstick. Under the watchful eye of Mrs. Huochi, everyone moved quickly without fighting or grabbing. It's just that the school's broomsticks are old, and each one is very worn. The branches are spread out in a disorderly manner, and the oak handles are uneven. Sweeping the floor is uncomfortable. But they're going to sit on this thing and fly. Wade suddenly felt that flying on a broomstick might not be friendly to the tailbone. He heard Michael mutter under his breath, "Meteor, the cheapest broom." Wade took a look and saw that Michael's broom was a little more worn out than his. It looked like it was made of weeds. Mrs. Huo said loudly, "Stretch out your right hand, put your hand on the broom handle, and say, 'Get up.'" "Get up," the students shouted together. Wade's broom rolled on the ground twice before jumping into his hand. He reached out and held it, feeling that he didn't need to use much force because the broom would float in the air on its own. He turned to look at the others. Some people succeeded immediately, and some people, like Michael, the broom bounced on the ground like a dehydrated fish, and it took a long time to reach his hand. After all the students held the broom, Mrs. Huochi taught everyone how to ride the broom so as not to fall off, and severely corrected some students' wrong sitting postures. Vader originally thought this would be simple, because he remembered that in the movies, Harry Potter always just jumped on his broom and flew away. But after actually riding it, I realized that this kind of thing is not that simple. After all, a broom handle is just a thin stick, and balancing on it requires some skill. Fortunately, the pressure on some fragile bones was not as great as expected, and there was some kind of spell cast on the broom that made riding on it feel like sitting on a chair. Not too comfortable, but not that uncomfortable either. Until everyone's sitting position satisfied Mrs. Hooch, she allowed the students to proceed to the next step, flying. "As soon as I blow the whistle, you guys will kick hard to the ground," Mrs. Huochi said. "Hold on to your brooms, but don't lift them too high, unless you want to fly into the clouds. Lift up a little, and slowly rise a few steps, feet high, then slowly slides forward, then slowly returns to the ground." Mrs. Huochi said slowly 3 times in a row, and then said, "Pay attention to my whistle, 3, 2, 1. When the whistle sounded, the students immediately appeared in different layers. Some flew too high, some plunged to the ground, and 2 students failed to maintain their balance and rolled off their brooms with a grunt. Mrs. Huochi frowned and waved her wand in time. Finally, no one was hurt. Suddenly, another scream was heard. A girl from Ravenclaw House rushed towards the broom shed on a broomstick. "There are many obstacles," Mrs. Huochi shouted. The girl stayed in the air for a moment, and then although she still hit the wall, the force had slowed down, but her broom was knocked apart. Mrs. Huochi did not scold her, but used the flying curse to summon another old broom and asked the girl to continue practicing. Vader rode his broom and hovered at a higher place, and then tried to increase his speed little by little. There are only 5 or 6 students like him who can gradually control their own brooms, and most of them are ordered by Mrs. Hooch not to fly higher than the height of the broom shed. Even so, accidents continued. For example, 2 students' broomsticks were crooked, and then collided in the air uncontrollably. For example, there was a Hufflepuff boy who flew very well at low altitude, but as soon as he raised his broom to a height of less than 5 meters, he blinked. Quan fell off his broom. The poor student was afraid of heights. The first flying lesson can be said to be chaos. Mrs. Huochi was putting out fires in all directions like an octopus, waving her wand with a swishing sound, constantly rescuing students from various crises that might break their necks. She herself was hit by a reckless student, which made Mrs. Hooch look livid with anger and deducted a full 5 points from Hufflepuff. Wade finally understood why Mrs. Huochi always had a bad look on her face and looked very angry. Any experienced driver who is teaching a novice driver to drive and sees that the novice driver keeps making some low-level and stupid mistakes will probably be like Mrs. Huochi. Finally, the flying lessons were over, and the students went to the school infirmary in droves to see Madame Pomfrey for treatment of various scrapes, sprains, and falls. Wade and Michael were intact, and they returned to the auditorium for dinner together. Wade, Hermione, who was eating, saw them and immediately waved to say hello. Wade saw that she was sitting alone at one end of the long table, so he simply walked over and sat at the Gryffindor table. Hermione glanced at them and asked, "Did the flying class go well?" "Too tired," Michael said tiredly. He felt that he needed to replenish a lot of energy. After taking 2 pieces of bread with butter, he put a roasted chicken leg on the plate. Wade first poured a glass of juice and drank it all, and then said, "Everyone is flying for the first time, very unskilled, more than half of the people were slightly injured, and some people fainted." Hermione nodded. "I have to say, I'm not surprised at all. Flying in the air without any protection, it's natural to get injured." She obviously didn't like riding a broom or Quidditch at all. This is a skill that requires diligent training to master. A good Quidditch player can fly more flexibly than a bird. After a flying class, Michael finally regained his energy. But Wade remembered that he had been hovering in the air during class. If he flew a little higher, the broom, or Michael on the broom, would start to tremble. He was a typical novice who loved to play. But Michael convinced him with just one sentence. "Think about it, Wade." Michael said in a bewitching tone, "We can fly directly to the dormitory on a broom, and we don't have to climb the stairs anymore. I saw the students on the Quidditch team do this." That day, until he went back to the dormitory to sleep, Wade's mind was full of flying brooms. At night, he dreamed that he was flying on a broom, as free as a bird. He flew over Hogwarts Castle, over the stadium, over the Forbidden Forest and the Black Lake. He circled on the grass and passed through the corridor of the castle. Everyone looked up at him in surprise. Michael was hanging on the stairs half dead, his eyes were dull with exhaustion. But Wade was far away from those stairs. He drew a graceful arc in the air, and finally passed through the window lightly and landed directly on his bed. After waking up, Wade still had the wonderful feeling of flying freely in his mind. He looked at the ceiling with a sense of loss and couldn't fall asleep for a long time. But first-year freshmen are not allowed to bring brooms to school, and a Nimbus 2000 costs at least 1,000 gold galleons. Gray's father Ferdinand opened a toy factory, and the products can be sold to the United States, so their family is relatively wealthy among ordinary people. Wade also has a lot of pocket money, which allows him to buy all kinds of snacks at will. But anyway, asking parents for 1,000 galleons to buy something like a toy is something that Wade couldn't do. It would be nice if he could achieve financial freedom by himself, Wade couldn't help thinking. If he was in the Muggle world, he could quickly accumulate wealth with his understanding of the future. But as a student in a boarding school, how can he make money? Wade couldn't help but imagine. Saturday was a day off, and when Wade arrived at the practice room in the morning, he found Hermione was already there. Among the few people, Hermione spent the longest time in the practice room. Wade sometimes read in the common room or dormitory of Ravenclaw because he didn't want to go downstairs, but Hermione spent almost all her free time in the practice room. Wade was sure that the girl didn't have any friends in Gryffindor College except for Neville, and the girls in the same dormitory didn't seem to have a good relationship with her. The girls always acted together, went to the classroom together, ate together, and went to the toilet together, but Hermione was always alone. However, Wade did not persuade her to get along well with her classmates. Emotional intelligence is something that is innate, and Wade himself is not the type who is good at dancing with long sleeves, and he does not like to compromise himself to please others. But today, the girl was not studying, but ping-pong-pong, nailing something on the wall. "What is this?" Wade leaned over to take a look. The rectangular wooden board was decorated with simple patterns and a line of cursive characters on it. Umbrella Room. Wade's expression was a little strange. He thought of Umbrella Corporation, a company that made biochemical viruses and destroyed the world. "Yes." Hermione nailed the last nail and said, "There are many practice rooms, but this is the only one that belongs to us. I think it should have a special name. In this way, when others hear us say, Umbrella Room, they don't know where it is." Okay. Wade didn't care much about such trivial matters. He took a book from the shelf and sat down to start writing homework for yesterday's herbology class. Today's practice room, or umbrella room, has changed a lot compared to the original. Each of them occupied a space against the wall, with bookshelves placed against the wall, and arranged the table around it according to their own preferences. Hermione's shelf was full of books, many of which were borrowed from the library and had not been returned. She also had a thick stack of brand new parchment, 2 bottles of ink and 7 or 8 quills. These things of hers were consumed very quickly. Since parchment was more expensive, Hermione usually took notes in notebooks bought from Muggle stores. The Granger family was not short of money, but the girl's character was somewhat thrifty and would not spend money on unnecessary things. In addition to textbooks, Wade's shelf also had all the notes he had sorted out so far. Michael and others often borrowed them. According to them, with Wade's notes, even if they didn't attend class, they could pass the final exam. In addition, there were many props for transformation, such as buttons, matches, chess pieces and other commonly used things. After the flying class, a miniature model of a flying broom was quietly added to his desk. Michael's place was much more fancy. He put all kinds of messy things such as perfume, mirrors, gift boxes, chocolates, etc. on the wall. There was a poster of a Quidditch star on the wall. On the table was a model of a dragon, cookies that were not finished yesterday, and badges collected from somewhere. Michael proved with his own actions that not every Ravenclaw loves learning. Theo from Hufflepuff is very much loved by Professor Sprout, and he is also very good at herbology. There are 2 rows of fist-sized small flower pots on his shelf, which are all plants cultivated by Theo himself, including common white moss, mint, marjoram, yarrow, etc. There is also a pot of Mibu Mibao on the table. This plant looks like a diseased internal organ, covered with boils, and will spray sticky and smelly liquid to attack others. In order to avoid accidental injuries, Theo put a hemispherical glass cover on it. Neville likes Theo's arrangement very much. He also wants to get a similar one, but because of the limited pocket money, he currently only has 3 or 4 pitiful flower pots. He also prepared some fertilizer, and everyone was asked to put it in the corner of the umbrella house so as not to affect breathing. Ryan is also good at herbology, but his favorite is astronomy, so there is a set of planetary models on his desk, and the large and small planets will slowly rotate around the sun in the middle. In addition, Ryan also collected various quills and inks of different colors, neatly placed on the bookshelf. Several other people came to the umbrella house one after another. They noticed the new name of the practice room and praised it. Michael also clapped his hands on the table and praised Hermione for her cleverness and surprise. Although she knew that this guy was just habitually praising women, Hermione's cheeks were still slightly red with joy. Theo put down his school bag and said, "If you ask me, not only should the practice room have a new name, we should also have a name to show that we are a whole." "Yes," Ryan nodded. "If you always think that I am a Hufflepuff, he is a Ravenclaw, and you are a Gryffindor, there will always be a gap. We should be a collective that transcends the differences between colleges." "Suddenly it feels formal," Michael said excitedly. "Then what should we call it?" "Wade." He looked at his friend. Wade was suddenly called out, and was stunned. "Ah, after-school tutoring interest group. You'd better not give any suggestions." Michael turned his head expressionlessly. "Hermione." Hermione was suddenly a little nervous for some reason. "Magic Lovers Club." Michael sighed. "Hermione, what's the difference between this and Wade's after-school tutoring interest group?" "What about Neville?" Neville stammered. I can't think of anything for the time being." Theo said. "How about the Sunflower Club? Sunflowers symbolize hope, sunshine, loyalty, determination and growth, isn't it very suitable?" Michael began to struggle. "Indeed, it is very suitable in all senses, but it feels a bit ordinary for some reason. If he were to name it himself, he couldn't say anything better." "Leanne." Michael looked at the last person, and decided that if he didn't have a good idea, he would call it the Sunflower Club. Ryan fiddled with the planetary model on his desk, thought for a while and said, "How about Starry Sky Chaser? SSC for short." Michael clapped his hands and praised loudly, "Cool." With an official name, this group that had just happened to get together suddenly became official. Everyone discussed some details together. For example, adding other members must obtain everyone's consent, cannot destroy other people's things, SSC members should protect each other when facing professors or other students, etc. Wade originally felt that this was somewhat of a game, a group of just a few people, who would gather or break up if they didn't, what rules and regulations should be set. But everyone else participated very seriously, which gave Wade some strange feelings. It was as if he had really joined some mysterious organization. Root was used as an antitoxic drug in ancient Greece. It was discovered in the 16th century AD. So far, people have found that its medicinal value has the following types. The extract of stems and leaves can expel toxins, pollen sprayed on basilisks. The poisonous gas produced has a defensive effect. Root can be widely planted, and the cultivation method is, you need to pay attention when cultivating. Wade placed the last letter on the parchment and finished yesterday's homework for herbal medicine class. As for the homework for other subjects, he had completed it as early as the day he finished class. Vader checked the grammar again, waited for the ink to dry, and rolled up the parchment. "Vade, are you done with your homework?" Hermione came over and asked. "Right, I have something to tell you," Hermione whispered. The two of them moved to the other side of the classroom, and Wade waved his magic wand. "Close your ears and listen." So no matter how loud they speak, it is just a subtle buzzing in other people's ears. Vader looked at Hermione's worried expression and asked, "What happened?" "That's right, the afternoon before yesterday, that guy Malfoy asked Harry to duel at midnight in the trophy room. As soon as I heard that, I knew that guy had no good intentions, because he didn't have the courage at all," Hermione said angrily. "But Lee and Ron didn't listen to my advice at all, just for the sake of Boy's face, they were so selfish. They didn't even think about how many points they would lose if they were caught." Quote. Hermione took a few deep breaths and suppressed her anger before continuing. "Of course, that's not the point, because we were lucky enough not to be caught, even though it was just a little bit." Wade caught the key word. "Yes, when I was trying to stop them from doing something stupid, I was accidentally locked out of the lounge door and had to act with the two of them." Hermione frowned and said in disgust, "It turned out that Malfoy did not go to the prize. In the showroom, he also revealed the news to Filch, that despicable guy. Then when we escaped, we broke into a locked room." Hermione suddenly lowered her voice and asked, "Vade, do you remember what Professor Dumbledore said when school first started?" Vader thought for a moment. Dumbledore's speech was not much in content. Of course, what impressed him most was, "Idiot, cry, residue, wretched, oh, it's not this." Hermione rolled her eyes and reminded, "It's, anyone who doesn't want to suffer an accident and die a painful death. Don't go to the corridor on the 4th floor." Wade remembered, "You guys went to the 4th floor. What did you see?" "Yes, we accidentally ran to the 4th floor, and then we saw Hermione swallowed, with some lingering fear on her face, "a three-headed dog as tall as a house." "How did you survive?" Vader was speechless. He couldn't remember such details for a long time, and he didn't expect Hermione and the others to start experiencing such an adventure so early. He said, "I remember seeing this kind of monster in a book. Although today's three-headed dog is not the legendary hell dog, its teeth can easily crush a skull, and there are corrosive poisons on its teeth. The wound will be difficult to heal after being bitten by that guy. It might not have reacted at first, but then it roared and pounced on us, and we were almost eaten by it." Hermione clenched her fists, her body trembling slightly. "The school actually put such a dangerous monster in the castle, it's unbelievable. Even if you want to use it to guard something, what if another reckless student breaks in? Doesn't the school care about the safety of ordinary students at all?" Vader made a joke. "Maybe the magic school has something like a death indicator. It doesn't matter how many students die every year, it just serves as a wake-up call for others. Let them know not to take the professor's words inappropriately. One thing. There is such a thing." Hermione scratched her face in horror and said incoherently, "But I didn't see it at all in Hogwarts. A school history, yes, this kind of thing, of course it won't be in the book, it's terrible. How could the Ministry of Magic allow it?" Vader didn't expect that she didn't doubt his words at all, and he quickly raised his hands to apologize. "I'm sorry. Hermione, I was just talking nonsense. Don't take it seriously." Hermione looked at him blankly, tears even forming in her brown eyes. Now Vader really felt a little guilty in his heart. He said sincerely again, "Sorry, I just saw that you seemed to be scared, so I made a joke. But it seems to have turned into a hell joke. I am an idiot. Don't be angry." Hermione kept a straight face and said nothing, and was so angry that she ignored Wade for a long time. It wasn't until the practice was over and everyone else had left, that Vader stopped Hermione and apologized repeatedly, finally letting the girl let go. Hermione lowered her head and said dully, "Actually, I know, everyone doesn't like me, but I treat you as a friend, so don't tease me like others." Vader was so soft-hearted that he felt so guilty that he would slap himself even if he thought about it in the middle of the night, because he knew that Hermione was not having a good time in Gryffindor during this period, so he appears sensitive and vulnerable. He raised his 2 fingers and said seriously like an oath, "I'm sorry, I promise there will never be a next time." Hermione looked into his eyes for a long time before whispering, "A joke must make both parties happy before it is considered a joke." "I remember." Vader felt ashamed. He actually wanted a real 11-year-old girl to tell him such a simple truth. Could it be that after reviving his life, he really regarded himself as a heartless little boy? Looking at the vortex above his head, Hermione smiled slightly. "Okay, I'm not angry anymore." The girl coughed dryly. "Speaking of the 3-headed dog, actually, I want to discuss with you whether I should go find Professor McGonagall." "You want to talk to Professor McGonagall about the safety of 3-headed dogs?" Vader understood what she meant immediately. "Yes." Hermione scratched her already messy hair in annoyance and said, "Although they have locked that room, it can be opened with an unlocking spell. If any curious students run in, alas, I would like to suggest to Professor McGonagall that the room should be hidden with powerful magic, but that would reveal that we have violated the school ban." "Why don't you think about it from another angle, Hermione?" Wade thought for a moment and said, "Maybe the door was so crudely sealed just to allow someone to open it." Hermione's eyes slowly widened, and she obviously understood something. She trembled and said, "So, that's it." "That's right," Wade said, "it's Harry Potter." "Death Index," Hermione shouted at the same time. The two looked at each other. "Harry Potter," Hermione said in surprise. "It's a joke," Wade said helplessly. The two looked at each other again. Hermione frowned. Hermione gradually understood. "No wonder," she whispered. "Percy, Gryffindor's prefect, a 5th-year Weasley, said that in the past, Professor Dumbledore would explain the reason for any place where students were not allowed to go. But this time, he just said that students were not allowed to enter the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor, but he didn't say why. If it was clearly stated that there was a 3-headed dog hidden there, even the Weasley twins would not run to seek death, let alone Potter, who is only in the 1st year." Wade was not surprised. The vague warning is to attract the curious Gryffindor. Dumbledore probably left some test there. He remembered that Harry Potter played a real-life game in the 1st year. He and his friends each solved a level with their own wisdom and ability. In the end, Harry used the magic of love to kill the bottom boss Voldemort. The 7, Harry Potter, books are thicker and darker than the previous ones, but the first one is still full of childishness. Even the conspiracy and tricks seem innocent and cute. Voldemort came to Harry Potter to gain experience. How could he do that? Hermione's fear immediately turned into anger. Someone might die. Does it matter? Or does he not care about Harry Potter's life at all? Then did you rush in unexpectedly and get hurt by the 3-headed dog? Wade asked back. That's not the case. But that's because it started. Ah. Hermione suddenly realized, and felt like she had seen the truth through the fog. I guess, just a guess, maybe Dumbledore put some restrictions on the 3-headed dog, so that it would not really attack the students who accidentally broke in, but just scare them. But if you want to do something further, the 3-headed dog will not sit idly by. Wade said cautiously. I saw it standing on a trapdoor. Hermione said. It must be guarding something. If the facts are as we guessed, Wade finally said, Harry Potter will definitely know what it is guarding. The progress of things seemed to be slowed down, perhaps because Hermione was angry with Harry and Ron and didn't pay much attention to them, so she didn't get any further news. But Wade didn't care much about these things. He knew that everything was under Dumbledore's watch and there was nothing to worry about. Compared with Harry Potter's adventure, Wade was more concerned about the progress of spells. In the latest practice, he accidentally discovered that it was not only when he was guiding others that he could see the arc of guiding the correct method of casting spells. When he looked in the mirror, he could also see his own guiding line, which made his spell practice much faster. So Wade took some time to practice potions. There were always a lot of ordinary materials on the shelf behind the potions classroom, free for students to practice, but because of Professor Snape, most students were unwilling to step into the underground classroom except for class, even Slytherin students. Wade practiced potions in his spare time, and Snape turned a blind eye and occasionally pointed out his mistakes in a sarcastic tone. Overall, as long as you are not a glass heart, you can still learn a lot from him. At this time, Wade was glad that he was a Ravenclaw. If he was a Gryffindor lion, he might have been kicked out by Snape on the first day he stepped into the potion class privately. One afternoon, Wade successfully boiled a pot of wound-cleaning agent, which was evaluated by Professor Snape as barely usable, and asked him to send it to Madame Pomfrey in the infirmary. The Quidditch game was about to start, and the infirmary would become busy at this time. When Wade returned to the Umbrella House from the school infirmary, he found that everyone was very excited. Everyone gathered around Theo, and even Hermione put down her book and said in a calculation, "I want 3 feet of thick parchment and 5 bottles of ink. I heard that there is a kind of shorthand quill pen that is very useful. If there is one, I also want to buy 2. Theo wrote it down quickly, and Michael next to him shouted, "Oh, please, Hermione. I know you love to study, but life would be so boring if there was only study. You should buy yourself something that can bring fun. Honeydukes, candies are super good. I recommend blowing super bubblegum. It can fill the whole room with blue bellflower colored bubbles, which is almost the favorite of girls. Fizzy Bee candy is also a hot selling product, and there is also butterbeer from the 3 Broomsticks bar. Almost no one can resist drinking a cup." Quote. Hermione hesitated for a long time and said, "Then bring me another galleon of candy. No cockroach piles or weird things like that." Although it is not convenient for her to bring the candy back to the dormitory, this will definitely be questioned by other girls, and maybe even say some sour gossip, but she can put the candy in the Umbrella House and share it with her SSC partners. "What are you talking about?" Wade walked over and asked curiously. "You are finally here, Vader. We have all been waiting for you," Neville said happily. "This week is the first Hogsmeade weekend. Students in 3rd grade and above can go to Hogsmeade Village." "I know," Wade said, "but what does this have to do with us first-year students?" Of course Vader had heard of Hogsmeade. It was the only village in the UK with only wizards and no muggles. It was said to be very unique and interesting, and it was right next to Hogwarts and could be walked there. However, Hogwarts stipulates that only 3rd-year students and above can go there on specific Saturdays, and they must have assigned permission from their guardian. Therefore, Vader and the others will not be able to go to Hogsmeade for at least 2 years. "It didn't matter originally," Michael said excitedly, but Theo said, a 3rd-year Hufflepuff student said that he could help the younger students buy some things they wanted, and also made a list of the product list of Grimmauld Village. Theo and Ryan said they can help us add the things we want. Wade took the product and looked at it while curiously asking, "Who is so kind? He doesn't mind the trouble, or is he doing it to make a profit?" Ryan shook his head and said, "No, Cedric is not helping to make money." Wade was startled. "What did you say his name was?" "Cedric," Ryan said. "Cedric Diggory, the number 1 student in the 3rd year. There are almost no Hufflepuff students who don't like him." Wade didn't ask any more questions. He looked down at the product list first. As a small village, Hogsmeade cannot be compared with the commercial center of the British wizarding world like Diagon Alley, and the number of shops is not too many. But although the Sparrow is small, it has all the essentials. You can find almost all types of shops, such as clothing stores, quill shops, magic equipment shops, post offices, bars, tea houses, etc. Of course, the most popular among students is the candy store. There is a long list of various candies on the product list, which is the sum of all other categories combined. Wade looked at the things that others wanted to buy and couldn't help but ask, can he get so many things? In the Hufflepuff lounge, Cedric specifically said. Theo smiled. He said, "Don't worry about whether my arms can lift it, there is a levitation spell." The rest of the 3rd grade the students said they could help too and would not leave Cedric alone. Michael lay on the table and lamented feebly. "Oh, why don't we Ravenclaws have such enthusiastic seniors? They will only look at you sideways and say something, 'Don't worry, you will also be there in 2 years. I can go.' And for your safety, no one offered to bring us a handful of sweets. Oh, it's another day to go to Hufflepuff." Theo and Ryan looked at each other and smiled proudly. And Hermione and Neville invariably thought of Gryffindor's prefect Percy Weasley. "I am a prefect, you must listen to me. Do you want to cause deductions for the house? Junior students, don't try to get away with it. Filch will check them one by one and won't let anyone who shouldn't go slip out. Of course, I will also help keep an eye on you troublemakers. Or the 2 Weasleys in 3rd year, of course no problem, dung bombs or burping powder, what an idea. You'll give Filch a surprise. Sake 15 silver sickle. I swear, only 5 nuts more expensive than Hogsmeade. However, before they got the money, Percy discovered their purchasing behavior. The most important thing was that most of the purchases made by the twins were prank products that would make Filch scream, so the 2 brothers were chased by their older brother. Running around in the lounge. Although Hermione and Neville are very different in academic performance, they are both marginal people in Gryffindor to some extent. They swallowed their complaints against the Weasleys, but in their hearts they envied the atmosphere of Hufflepuff. But he heard Vader smile and say, Michael, let's not say that we envy Hufflepuff for having a senior who is willing to take care of the younger students. When we reach the 3rd grade, you are willing to help the little wizards of Ravenclaw with shopping. Various candies. Are you kidding me? Michael said without thinking, this is so troublesome. I don't want to spend my last weekend just completing the to-do list. So, we are our own Ravenclaws. Vader said in a calm voice, choosing some products that others had not chosen so much that they could exchange them with each other after buying them. I just don't know if Cedric will be shocked by Theo's long list. Actually, I think, Vader, you are the same person as Cedric. After the day's study was over, Theo stayed specifically and said this to Wade. Vader was still immersed in the petrification spell at this time and completely forgot what everyone had said before. Theo looked into his eyes and said seriously, although I have never said it before, the reason why our SSC group came together is entirely because of you, Vader. You always selflessly guide us to practice spells, and you are also willing to share with us the notes you have compiled with great difficulty. I have never seen another Ravenclaw do this. Wade was a little surprised. He looked at Theo and didn't know what to say. Michael and Hermione are so smart, they play with us all because of you, me, Ryan, and Neville. The 3 of us originally didn't have outstanding grades, and we were even at the bottom in some subjects, but because of your help, we have recently begun to earn some points for the college. Professor Flitwick praised us several times. In the last herbal medicine class, Neville dared to raise his hand and speak, and Professor Sprout even gave him a bonus. 1 point. Theo finally concluded. Vade, you are Ravenclaw, but you are by no means egotistical or indifferent. You have given us a lot of help, that's what I want to tell you. For a long time after Theo left, Wade felt that his heart was filled with an inexplicable emotion. He packed up his things, walked out of the umbrella house, and saw Claudia in the portrait walking in the grass. There was a trace of sadness between the girl's brows, and her expression was very much like the sister Lynn in his impression. Watching the door of the umbrella house close, Wade said to himself, how could it be possible that they all gathered because of me? That guy Theo, could he have forgotten that this classroom is still his? I applied with Professor Sprout. Miss Claudia remained silent as ever. She never talked to the students, nor did she occasionally go out to visit like other portraits. She always stayed on this empty lawn. If she hadn't walked around occasionally, it would have been no different from a Muggle portrait. As expected, Cedric kept his word. He helped buy everything Vader and the others wrote on the list, and he didn't charge an extra canute. Oh my God, I'm flying! Hermione exclaimed. The brown-haired girl just drank a glass of drink and slowly floated up from the ground. Wade hurriedly reached out to hold her, so that she wouldn't fly too high and fall down and get hurt. After a long time, the magic of the drink disappeared, and Hermione slowly fell to the ground. She said a little angrily, they should write the precautions for consumption on the packaging. How interesting, Hermione, Michael said. Hermione blushed and glared at him, but I'm wearing a skirt. Michael was speechless and bowed his head and said, I'm sorry, you're right. Watch it, Theo shouted. I'm going to eat this black pepper urchin. Everyone looked at him expectantly. Theo threw the candy into his mouth, chewed it a few times, and his expression suddenly changed. The next second, he was spewing fire from his nose. Everyone laughed. Michael grabbed a handful of BB's multi-flavored beans and distributed them to everyone, saying excitedly, come, try this multi-flavored bean. Let's bet on who is the most unlucky. He was the first to throw one into his mouth. It's okay, it tastes like carrots. Ryan ate one and said with a bitter face, "Unlucky, earwax tastes." Wade was curious. "How do you know what earwax tastes like?" Ryan was stunned, looking up and down, then turned to Theo as if nothing had happened. "Hurry up, it's your turn." Theo ate it with a smile. Honeydew melon taste. So lucky. Hermione also ate one. Beef taste, not bad. Neville looked at the yellow multi-flavored beans in his hand with fear, muttering, "Isn't it always me who is unlucky?" He closed his eyes and swallowed it, then stuck out his tongue and shouted incoherently, "Water, water, water." "Did you taste the taste of sand?" Michael handed him the water and asked curiously. Neville drank a large glass of water and said tearfully, "It tastes like a super hot chili." Everyone looked at Wade. Wade looked at the multi-flavor beans with disdain. He had never eaten this specialty of the wizarding world, because he heard that the BB multi-flavor beans even tasted like vomit. What kind of mischievous thinking was the manufacturer? But everyone was waiting for him. After a while of mental preparation, Wade finally threw the beans into his mouth. "What does it taste like?" his companions asked curiously. Wade breathed a sigh of relief and smiled, "It tastes like snow." I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.